The hissing sound made Jessica come to her senses. After a couple of seconds, she realized that the noise was coming from the waves crashing onto the sandy shore, forming numerous small air bubbles that created foam. Her palms and left cheek were resting on something rough, resembling tiny grains. A minute later, Jessica opened her eyes. The first thing she saw was sand, damp and clinging to her skin. She brushed a wet strand of hair from her face, still lying on her stomach. Unpleasant, dull pain throbbed in her neck and knee joints, as if her entire body had stiffened. Jessica tried to remember what had happened to her, but her attempts only resulted in a sharp, throbbing pain throughout her head. She lifted herself up, propping herself on her hands. There were abrasions on her knees. Her dress was wet and clung to her body. The wounds stung and tingled. Jessica winced in pain. Looking around, she became even more bewildered, for she found herself in the middle of a deserted place. On one side was a river, and on the other, the sandy shore, which was further replaced by a continuous forest. Jessica strained her memory once more. What had happened? How did she end up here? But all her questions were met with a groan. Attempting to stand, she felt dizzy. However, after a short while, she managed to shake off the unpleasant sensation. Her throat was parched, but the discomfort in her legs drew her attention to her shoes. Her wet sneakers had swollen, pressing against her toes and heels. Jessica sat back on the sand and removed them, revealing wrinkled white skin with sand trapped between her toes. Then Jessica stood up again and approached the river. Intense thirst overcame her, and she scooped water into her palms a couple of times. She looked out over the horizon, with a feeling that no one had ever been here before. The sun was scorching, forcing her to shield her eyes with her hand. The burning sensation in some places reminded her of the abrasions and scratches. Jessica turned to face the forest, hoping to find rustic cottages where people could help her. With a sigh, she set off. After taking a few steps, Jessica realized that something was wrong with her right leg. It seemed to be dislocated. Limping, Jessica made her way toward the forest. Walking barefoot on pine needles and cones was far from pleasant. Crooked roots were everywhere, and dry twigs occasionally poked her. In her thoughts, Jessica envisioned snakes ready to strike at her from the grass or under a large stone. Jessica had already covered a considerable distance, but there were still no houses in sight. Tripping, she fell to the ground. The soft moss cushioned her from the impact, growing in thick patches in some places. Her scraped knees pressed against the rough surface, causing a tingling and stinging sensation in her wounds. She gathered herself to stand, and then she heard growling in front of her. Jessica froze. Slowly raising her head, she directed her gaze toward the source of the unfriendly sound. A dog stood before her. It was quite large, likely a hunting dog. Jessica felt a mix of emotions, a joy at her potential rescue and fear of the dog's sharp jaws. Easy, easy. Hello, she tried to speak to it. The dog barked in response and then wagged its tail. Despite its somewhat friendly curiosity, it remained cautious. Jessica showed it her open palms. Overcoming her fear, she slowly rose to her feet, clutching the nearest tree trunk with her hand. The dog let out 2 loud barks, making Jessica flinch, and then started whining while looking back. That's it. I'll be rescued now, Jessica thought to herself, waiting for the appearance of the dog's owner. Footsteps were heard, and Jessica stared into the depths of the forest. A figure appeared. It was a man of indeterminate age, dressed in camouflage attire, approaching her. His sturdy rubber boots reached up to his knees, and he wore a bandana on his head. Charlie, he called to the dog. Charlie, come here, he commanded. The dog immediately brightened and rushed toward him. He didn't scare you, did he? Hello, the hunter inquired as he approached the woman. Not really, Jessica replied. Seeing her wet clothing and bare feet, he asked again, you're injured. What happened? The man took off his backpack and retrieved a first aid kit. Without waiting for her response, Jessica silently watched as the hunter skillfully and quickly treated her scraped knees and elbows. How did you end up here? He asked again, but Jessica didn't rush to answer. She couldn't find the right words to start her story. It may sound strange, but I don't remember anything at all, Jessica finally said. It seems like I ended up here by the river. Are you a mermaid? The hunter attempted to joke, but seeing the seriousness on Jessica's face, he quickly corrected himself. I'm sorry. I'll help you get to the nearest shelter. They'll assist you there," the man added. "I'm John," he introduced himself, extending his hand to the woman. The name sounded familiar to her. "What's your name?" he asked. "Jessica. That's one thing I am certain of," she confidently replied. "You won't get far with bare feet," John said, examining her feet, which had grass and moss sticking to them. "My sneakers got soaked, and they're chafing my feet terribly," Jessica replied, not eager to put her feet back into them. 5 minutes later, Jessica and John were walking through the woods together. Charlie ran ahead, sniffing and searching for something. "How much farther is it to the nearest house?" Jessica asked, struggling to walk across the rugged terrain. "Just a couple 100 meters," grumbled John, adjusting his rifle. Indeed, before long, a large white brick house came into view. For a simple dwelling, it was quite substantial. As they approached, Jessica became increasingly intrigued by its peculiar appearance. The two-story structure had both large and small windows, and it appeared rather old. Women in light clothing with headscarves were visible by the tall wooden gates. "This is a monastery," John explained, pausing about 50 meters away. "They'll feed you and provide temporary shelter until you recover." Then he headed toward the gates. Jessica felt somewhat awkward about her appearance and helplessness. She didn't want to burden them. John handed Jessica over to the women from the monastery and then took his leave. "Come with me. Don't be afraid." "Come, my dear," the oldest woman among them said. They entered the monastery, and the air was filled with the aroma of freshly baked bread. "Follow me," the old woman said, gesturing with her hand. Together, they walked down the corridor and turned left. The old woman opened a door, and the sunlight immediately filled the corridor. "Make yourself at home. You'll find a clean set of clothes in the wardrobe. There's a shower at the other end of the corridor. Then, come down for lunch. We always have lunch at 1 o'clock, the woman explained. "Forgive me, but what is your name?" Jessica inquired. "Kiernan," the woman replied, her face adorned with a soft smile. It seemed like she radiated happiness, kindness, and love. "Thank you," Jessica replied. Kiernan smiled again and closed the door behind her. Jessica looked around the room. It was quite cozy and simple, furnished with a bed, a table, a chair, and a small wardrobe. A large window filled the room with daylight, which brought a pleasant and joyful feeling to her soul. Jessica peered into the wardrobe, finding a clean and neatly folded set of clothes, as well as a towel. She immediately made use of everything provided. Entering the dining room, Jessica was slightly surprised, but she tried not to show it. A large, elongated table was occupied by many women, all dressed in light clothing, with white and cream-colored headscarves. Jessica adjusted her nearly floor-length dress and, upon seeing Kiernan's extended hand, she pointed to a spot and proceeded to the table. Jessica was very hungry and felt a simultaneous desire for food and drink, but she tried to maintain composure. "Meet Jessica," Kiernan introduced, rising from her seat. "She miraculously survived the storm. It washed her ashore. Jessica has amnesia, so she'll be staying with us for a while. Please treat her with respect," she said, taking her seat once more. Jessica made an effort to be friendly, although she felt somewhat out of place here. All the women in the dining room appeared so proper, pure, and radiant. She was very grateful to them for providing shelter and food. "Thank you for taking me in. You are all very kind," Jessica said, feeling a sense of gratitude. "Don't worry, my dear. Helping others is normal," another woman said, her lips stretching into a smile. She closed her eyes, paused for a moment, and then began to eat. Her name was Beth, and she appeared to be of indeterminate age. Her eyes seemed a little tired, having likely seen quite a bit in their time, yet they still sparkled. Her voice sounded young, as if she were in her 30s. Anticipating a delicious meal, Jessica began eating. The first spoonful of nourishing broth felt like a second chance at life. With each bite, her face relaxed, and her body was filled with a pleasant languor. After finishing her portion, she felt a surge of energy and positivity. However, this was overshadowed by her complete lack of understanding of what had happened before all of this. After the soup, they served tea. 4 women brought in megs and plates of sweets. It turned out that each woman here had a role and engaged in various activities. While sipping her tea, the women engaged in conversations, enjoyed their sweets, refilled their tea, and conversed once again. At 2 o'clock, everyone rose from the table and dispersed to their respective tasks. Jessica approached Kiernan, who, as it turned out, was the oldest and in charge. Jessica was surprised at how Kiernan managed to lead with such a gentle character when dealing with a large group of people. Perhaps it was the people themselves who were here of their own free will. "Is there something I can do here?" Jessica asked. "Do you know how to sew or bake?" the woman inquired. Jessica was about to respond hastily, but upon reflection, she found herself at a loss for words. Kiernan looked at her attentively and, realizing Jessica's hesitation, added, "Don't worry. It's easy to find out," she said. After lunch, they walked together into another room where two women were already working on sewing machines. Jessica warmly smiled at them. "The monastery needs to sustain itself, so we sew and bake bread for sale. Every morning, a van comes to pick up the finished products," explained Kiernan. "All the women here are friendly, so you'll quickly find common ground. They'll teach you everything you need to know. You can start right away," she said, her lips forming another smile. Jessica approached one of the sewing machines and took the threads in her hands. Her hands seemed to instinctively remember what they once knew, and in a matter of seconds, the machine was fully threaded. "Give it a try. I'm sure you'll get the hang of it quickly," the supervisor said, then left the room. "Did you really lose your memory?" one of the workers asked, pausing her work. Jessica nodded. "Unfortunately, completely. So you can't remember anything at all?" she inquired, meeting someone like Jessica for the first time. "No, not at all," Jessica replied. "But Kiernan said that the work I used to do might help me remember my past," she added. "I'm Anne, and this is Elizabeth," she said, pointing to the second woman who waved. "We used to have another girl working with us, but she returned to the regular world. It became too difficult for her," Anne said, folding the fabric. "Do you want to go back?" Jessica asked. "Where?" Anne asked when she finished sewing the edge. "To the city," Jessica explained with a hint of a smirk. "No," Anne said emphatically. "That requires a special sign or a feeling in your heart," she explained, pressing the pedal once more. "How did you end up here?" Jessica asked, sincerely puzzled as to why young women would choose such a life. "I came here myself. I don't have a husband or children, so I decided to get closer to God, so to speak," she laughed. "It's a bit tough to be alone, but here we have nature, community, work, and beauty. The monastery has become like a family to me," she explained. "What about you, Elizabeth? If it's not a secret, why did you choose this life?" Jessica asked the second woman. "I'm here temporarily, to sort out my farts, to understand what truly matters in this world," Elizabeth said before resuming her sewing. "Over there, by the stack of fabrics. Pick any one you like and sew following the pattern," Anne instructed. "Maybe you'll remember something," she added. Jessica chose a fabric with a pattern of small green apples, and a piece of paper with measurements was nearby. Measuring the necessary dimensions with a ruler, she cut the fabric into the required rectangles. When she turned the fabric with the pattern towards her, she noticed the light green apples with a single dark green leaf, and they felt oddly familiar, as if she had seen them before. Jessica deliberately fixed her gaze on them, hoping to trigger a memory, a recollection of where she might have seen them before. However, her imagination couldn't conjure a firm sense of what they might signify in her life, not even in the context of a possible nephew or her own child. Jessica was surprised by how thoroughly her memory had wiped out her previous life. For a moment, it seemed like she might never be able to remember who she was and what her past had entailed. After finishing her work with the towels, she neatly stacked them for washing. The beautiful sunset outside the window stirred a sense of beauty within her, yet it also evoked a longing for her current situation. The next morning began at 6 a.m., with all the women gathering for prayer. Jessica joined them, feeling like she had never believed in God as strongly as these women did. Yet now, she had a significant request: to help her recover her lost memories. Life in the monastery followed its own rhythm. Mornings started with prayer, followed by optional morning exercises, and then breakfast. Afterward, everyone went to their respective workstations. Jessica enjoyed working as a seamstress. She quickly bonded with Anne and Elizabeth. The girls were pleasant, positive, and full of humor. Often, their work time turned into a lively period of jokes and laughter. Jessica felt like she had never laughed so heartily before. 2 months had passed since Jessica began living in the monastery, but during that time, not a single memory from her previous life had surfaced. She still couldn't recall her last name, her age, her hometown, or how she ended up on the riverbank. One morning, one of the girls who usually handled the product deliveries couldn't make it to work due to not feeling well. Jessica took her place. Alongside her partner, they lowered the containers filled with bread and neatly packaged towels and bed linens. Jessica placed the last stack of towels on a special table, from which the driver would pick them up, and turned to head back to the monastery. It was then that she heard a familiar voice. The man was chatting with her partner, and they were making jokes about the products. "You use so much that I think everyone in this town will have enough," the man jokingly remarked, which elicited laughter from the woman. Jessica's hearing sharpened. She paused, discreetly peering from behind a corner. She tried to get a glimpse of the man's face, but, unfortunately, it didn't seem familiar to her. She didn't dare approach and ask him, fearing that he might consider her odd or as someone trying to strike up a conversation. The familiar laughter resounded once more. Certain notes in the man's voice felt painfully familiar. It was as if his name was right on the tip of her tongue, but it just wouldn't come to her. The driver then bid farewell to the woman and left in his vehicle. A little later, Jessica inquired, "Who was that?" "That was Aaron," her partner effortlessly replied. "He always comes to visit us," she added, adjusting her headscarf. "He's a good man and quite free-spirited, although a bit mischievous," she concluded. "Is it allowed to communicate with men here and have relationships?" Jessica asked. Her partner laughed. "No, of course not. But nobody is forced to stay here against their will. The only thing is, if you're in the monastery, you should abide by decorum. That's why you came here, after all," she answered, entering the monastery's courtyard. After a brief pause, she added, "Aaron has been visiting us for a long time. If you like him, you can deliver the products to him next time," she suggested. Jessica didn't respond. After all, she didn't actually aim to get to know him. She was simply curious if she knew him or not. That night, she had a strange dream. She held a little boy in her arms, just over a year old. Jessica gazed into his large, bottomless eyes like two blue lakes. They looked at her with purity, filled with longing, sorrow, and hope. In her dream, she felt a profound connection with him. But, like her memory, she couldn't explain it, nor could she remember. Jessica walked up to the mirror and removed her headscarf. She ran her hand through her light hair, which reached just below her shoulders. "I need to comb my hair," she thought. This morning, she had almost overslept, so she hastily put on the headscarf and headed to the prayer session, leaving her hair unattended. Over 2 months, she had become accustomed to reciting prayers. It had become routine for her. Taking a comb, Jessica began to run it through her hair. Looking at the earring in her ear, shaped like a golden wing with a blue gem, Jessica suddenly found herself transported into the past. It was autumn. She and Vincent were heading to a jewelry store together, both in high spirits. Vincent, a short man with dark hair and brown eyes, was telling her something and cracking jokes. Jessica was laughing. She was delighted to be going with him. They entered the jewelry store, as Vincent wanted to surprise Jessica. "Choose the earrings you like," he said, scanning the display. Jessica's eyes sparkled with excitement, and mischievousness danced in them. No one had ever made such offers to her before. 20-year-old Jessica, still very young and unaccustomed to such kindness and generosity, felt reluctant to spend someone else's money. She looked at Vincent. He was 15 years her senior. Catching her gaze, he waited for her to make a selection. "So, which ones do you like more?" he asked, nudging her toward a choice. Deciding not to be too cheeky, she settled on small and delicate earrings that matched the color of her eyes perfectly. Putting them on, she realized how truly beautiful they were. Turning to Vincent, she was met with his smile. The man's pleasant and attractive appearance, with features of Eastern origin, spoke of his gentle nature and kindness. The memory ended there. Jessica, as hard as she tried to push her memory further, couldn't progress beyond that point. Yet even this small fragment of her past stirred something inside her, making her feel agitated. Jessica felt an irresistible urge to share everything with Anne. Putting on her headscarf, she headed to the sewing department. The sound of laughter among the girls could be heard from behind the door. "I remember," Jessica exclaimed, swinging the door open. Her face was radiant, and her heart raced in her chest. The seamstresses fell silent, all eyes on Jessica. "I remembered," finally, Jessica repeated. "Ah," Elizabeth exclaimed, setting aside an embroidered towel. "Tell us everything," urged Anne, moving closer to Jessica. Still, Jessica was replaying the newly emerged fragment from her previous life in her mind. Shifting her gaze from one co-worker to another, she shared every detail she could remember. "Vincent," she repeated. "I remember his name for sure," Jessica said, finally taking a seat, facing the two women. Elizabeth and Anne looked at her with anticipation. Then, she recounted the small piece of her past that her memory had uncovered. Elizabeth bit her lip, as if analyzing what she had heard. "What was the name of the jewelry store?" she asked. A reasonable question indeed. Jessica's face lit up again. Her smile, along with raised eyebrows, indicated that Elizabeth's quick thinking had surprised her. "Well, there aren't that many jewelry stores. We can check the list and find a similar name, and from there, figure out the city," Anne suggested. Since Jessica arrived at the monastery, a notice was posted in the nearby areas about a found woman. However, no one had come forward, and Jessica couldn't recall anyone. Jessica approached the window, feeling an overwhelming sense of longing and endless sadness. "Jessica, what happened? Did you remember something else?" Anne asked, concerned. She couldn't stand it when someone was upset or cried. She always wanted to fix things right away. Jessica shook her head. "No, unfortunately, nothing else," she replied with a slightly trembling voice. "So what is it then?" A worried Anne continued. "The thing is, I thought, what if that boy from my dream is my son and Vincent's?" Jessica began. "Wait a minute," Anne said. "I'm already lost. Let's start from the beginning." Jessica and Elizabeth watched her, waiting for her to continue. "All right. We have Vincent, earrings, a jewelry store, and a boy with." She looked at Jessica particularly. "Blue eyes," she stammered, brushing her lower eyelid in an attempt to wipe away a tear. "That's it." Anne raised her index finger. Elizabeth and Jessica exchanged glances. Jessica sniffled. "We need to take the earrings, call all the jewelry stores, and ask who bought them, what season it was then," Anne said, addressing Jessica again. "Autumn." "But Anne, this won't work," Jessica said, rubbing her hands together. "Why?" Anne asked indignantly. "Because we don't know which autumn it was. It could have been that year, or maybe 5 years ago," Jessica replied, introducing the women to new considerations. Anne bit her lip. Her plan had fallen through. At that moment, the weather took a sharp turn. Clouds covered the sun, the wind picked up, leaves were torn from the branches and swirled in the air, and raindrops splattered on the windows. Lightning flashed, followed by thunder that rumbled loudly. The power in the entire building went out to prevent damage. The sky produced another jagged bolt of lightning, and a fresh round of thunder rolled in. "What a thunderstorm for the end of August, huh?" remarked Elizabeth, pulling the curtains. Rain drummed on the roof and cascaded down in large streams. "I actually enjoy walking in overcast weather," Anne said. "How about you?" she asked Jessica. Jessica looked at her in confusion. After a moment, laughter filled the room. "Yes, that's how it goes sometimes. Small towns, little villages, and two people can't find each other. Is it the work of higher powers? And if it is, what's the purpose?" A week later, on a Monday at 6 a.m., a truck arrived at the monastery to pick up the finished products for distribution. The monastery was not far, just 70 kilometers away, located in a remote forest near an unnamed river. The monastery was surrounded by dense forests, rocky mountains, brooks, and springs. A blessed place. Anyone seeking solitude, tranquility, and a chance to make sense of their life, to understand themselves and others, would find it all in this beautiful place. According to legend, this monastery was built by men 100 years ago. They formed communities and distanced themselves from civilization, not wishing to waste their lives on others' games and wars. However, their peaceful existence was not meant to be. Militant forces crushed their community, attempting to conquer with their faith. The resolute men met their end, and the monastery was left abandoned, covered in cobwebs and dust. But 13 years later, it came back to life. A small group of women breathed new life into it. They cleaned, repaired, and restored it in places. This marked a new chapter in the history of hermit settlements within the now women's monastery. Aaron shut off the engine. His extended time behind the wheel had taken a toll on his stiff back and neck. He got out and began a brief workout, attempting to loosen up his muscles. He squatted a few times, wiggled his legs, swung his torso, and rotated his shoulders and neck. Energy coursed through his veins once more. After his workout, Aaron looked up at the highest point of the monastery. Despite its age, the structure appeared majestic. It was as though merely looking at it conveyed a part of its strength and grandeur. Of course, after 50 years surrounded by women, the monastery had soaked up an endless reserve of female love and strength. This time, Allison and Jessica were tasked with bringing towels, bed linen, and bread. Jessica assisted in packing the bread into special containers. The room was hot. The ovens had been working all night, and the air was thick and stifling. "How do you manage in here?" Jessica asked, wiping her face. Beads of sweat glistened on her forehead. "I've gotten used to it," said the worker, Stephanie, as she was called. "Today, the humidity is particularly high. The air barely moves, and it feels oppressive." Jessica started to feel unwell but decided to ignore it. After filling a container with small holes, she grabbed it by the handles and headed for the exit. Her chest heaved, greedily trying to inhale the dense air, which seemed to have run out of oxygen. Darkness crept over her vision. Jessica continued to walk, thinking that it would pass soon. Finally, after climbing a small set of stairs, she intended to sit down and rest. But as soon as she felt a solid surface beneath her, her consciousness decided to depart this unbearable environment. Allison, who saw her, immediately called for other women's help. They lifted Jessica and carried her to her room. She quickly regained consciousness. "You need to lie down for a while," Kiernan said, placing her hands on Jessica's forehead. "After a head injury, dizziness and temporary loss of consciousness can occur. You need rest." She addressed another woman who had helped carry Jessica into the room. "Help Allison bring down the bread and bed linen." "All right." The woman nodded and disappeared behind the door. "Please, get some revitalizing tea," she called another woman. The dark-haired woman also nodded and left the room. "Don't worry, honey," Kiernan said gently as she sat on the edge of the bed. "This is all temporary. I heard you've remembered something about your life. Is that true?" "It does upset me a bit," Jessica replied, licking her dry lips. "Take off your headscarf. Let your body rest," Kiernan advised, hanging it on the back of the bed. "Like this." Jessica took a few sips of tea before continuing her story. "I'm afraid that even if I remember someday, it might be too late. And perhaps, if I have a child, they will grow up and forget me. Or rather, I won't be able to recognize my own child," Jessica concluded. A veil of sadness and despondency fell over her face. Well, my dear," Kiernan comforted her. "There's no need to torment yourself with unnecessary worries that may never materialize in life." She spoke so tenderly that it lifted Jessica's spirits. "But no matter how hard I try, no matter how much I pray to God, I can't remember anything except these earrings that Vincent gave me on my birthday," Jessica said, her frustration with herself building. Having said this, she looked at the elder. Jessica's eyes widened, and her growing anger was instantly dissolved. "Haha," laughter escaped from Jessica's lips. "It was my birthday," she said. Kiernan raised her open palms upwards. "You see, everything has its time. God never abandons anyone. He merely gives time for a person to prepare for what awaits them," she said with a calm and gentle voice that radiated kindness and genuine maternal care. Afterward, she gave Jessica a slight hug, drying her clothes. "Forgive me for speaking ill of God," Jessica said apologetically, looking at the elder with guilt. "Don't worry. It's not about you speaking angrily to God or anyone else. It's about filling yourself with that anger. And then, if you don't change your self-perception, you'll have to view everything around you through the prism of resentment. It's like looking at everything through dirty and scratched glasses. That's the issue," she explained and smiled again. Dimples formed on her wrinkled cheeks. Jessica gazed into her clear green eyes and felt overwhelmed with gratitude for this woman. She wanted to cry. After the conversation, Kiernan left Jessica alone. She quietly closed the door and went about her business. Jessica spent a little more time in bed. then got up and walked to the window. Her room's windows faced the central entrance. Women stood on either side of the wooden table with a roof on which the products were placed. A man was loading the last 2 packages of bed linen into the truck. Jessica examined his light brown hair, finding him rather attractive. He smiled and said something to the women. They chuckled softly. Then, the man placed the last package into the vehicle and clapped his hands as if shaking off dust. Afterward, he bid farewell to the women and glanced around. Then he looked up. Jessica caught his gaze. She stared at his face, unable to divert her eyes. The man, too, looked at her and then raised his hand in a greeting. In response, Jessica raised her right hand, holding it there for a few seconds. The man looked at her a bit longer and then turned around, getting into the car. The engine roared to life. The wheels gripped the ground, and the car drove away. "Was that Aaron?" she asked Christina when they all gathered for breakfast. "Yes, he recently replaced the previous driver," she explained. "He's a good guy," Christina added. After breakfast, everyone went back to their tasks. Each person did what they were best at. Sometimes, the women would switch roles, with the one baking bread taking over kitchen duties and vice versa. Jessica spread a duvet cover on the table. She needed to sew 2 more sides. She carefully aligned the corners and folded the fabric with her fingers, securing it with a pin. "Why isn't Vincent looking for you?" Elizabeth suddenly asked, approaching Jessica's table. She gazed thoughtfully at Elizabeth. Actually, Jessica pondered, why has there been complete silence from him so far? In response to Elizabeth's question, Jessica shrugged. Perhaps he doesn't even know about the existence of this monastery. She attempted to defend him. After all, the monastery intentionally kept its location secret to avoid becoming a tourist attraction drawing visitors from all over the world. The conversation fell silent, and Elizabeth returned to her table. Jessica silently continued to sew the 2 pieces together. She enjoyed sewing. The even stitching pleased her eyes, and the sewing machine dutifully performed its work, with each stitch lining up perfectly. Autumn had arrived. The days were growing shorter, evenings were noticeably darker, and the sun was becoming stingier with its warmth. The wind had brought the first snowflakes, and they merrily found their place on the ground. But, upon contact, they inevitably melted. The earth, however, was cooling, and the first white layer of snow covered the surface. Jessica took a walk around the monastery, and there was a rare silence. Nothing disturbed it. The air was fresh and quite cool. Jessica walked slowly on her familiar path. The walk was calming and brought her a sense of tranquility and quiet joy. She wasn't thinking about anything specific. She was just enjoying a Sunday, a day that each of the monastery's residents could spend as they pleased. But then, she was unexpectedly transported back in time. Images from her past began to surface in her mind very clearly and sequentially. Jessica remained calm, not wanting to scare away this precious opportunity. She kept walking, while her memory finally revealed what she had been asking for so long. When Jessica turned 18, circumstances left her completely on her own. Her grandmother had left her a small, modest house with limited amenities. By that time, Jessica had completed her studies at an economics college. However, she struggled to find a job in her field. To make a decent income, she got a job as a dancer in a club. Creating an atmosphere, dancing in beautiful costumes and outfits was a great pleasure for her. It didn't bring in a substantial income, but it was always honest and on time. She got from her work what she wanted: self-expression, self-realization, a sense of purpose, and a decent income. After 6 months, she managed to repair her grandmother's house, replace the windows, and even install running water. She was content with her job. The club's director was the only person genuinely interested in the well-being of the girls, their good spirits, and their immense creative potential. After all, picky guests had to be surprised, amazed, and entertained, and it was quite challenging to do so without imagination. Encouraged by her work colleagues and supported by other fellow dancers, Jessica managed to weather the tough times in her life. Over time, she began to contemplate buying a mortgage for her own apartment. But then, a very interesting guest appeared on the horizon. He frequented the nightclub during his business trips. Whenever he visited the club, He always chose seats closest to the cages where the girls were dancing or near the stage where unforgettable shows took place. The man generously tipped Jessica. He was captivated by her incredible energy, her stunning costumes, and her dance performance. Her charisma brought a sense of life to him and added new colors to his routine. Jessica became something bright and unattainable, a unique and exclusive bird he passionately desired to get to know better and become a more significant part of her life. He wanted to do something for her, to be the center of her attention. One day, as Jessica was returning home from the club, he offered her a ride home. She declined, unwilling to indulge in meaningless games. Then, his friend got out of the car, approached Jessica, and handed her a business card. "If you ever need help, give us a call," the stranger said, and returned to the driver's seat. Jessica remained in place. Behind the tinted windows, she didn't see Vincent's face, but she understood that the business card belonged to him. She tucked it into the first pocket of her bag, then got into a taxi and headed home. 2 more weeks passed in her usual routine. Jessica worked hard and even took extra shifts. With a little more effort, she'd be able to save up for the down payment on her apartment. Finally, she would be able to live in a cozy, warm, and dry space. Jessica inserted her key into the door, unlocked it, undressed, washed up at the sink, and then plopped down on the couch. Something hard was pressing against her back. Jessica reached behind her and retrieved a headband with antlers, one of which was twisted sideways. She straightened it out and looked at her unfinished work. Apparently, in her rush, she hadn't noticed placing it on the couch. Standing up, she put it back on the table where a small sewing machine was placed. Recently, Jessica had started sewing costumes for herself. The seamstress who had sewn for the other dancers seemed quite exhausted and had stopped taking individual orders. Jessica didn't want to perform routines in dull costumes, so she decided to learn sewing. Surprisingly, she picked it up quickly and easily, but she wasn't ready to give up dancing just yet. Thanks to her dancing, she could paint her life in vibrant colors. Waking up closer to evening, Jessica decided to take a walk in the nearby forest. The season was transitioning to autumn, and the scorching heat had subsided, but it was not yet time for cold weather. Jessica enjoyed strolling among the pines and birches. The forest brought her peace and filled her from within. When she returned and tried to open the door as usual, she realized it wouldn't budge. The key was stuck and wouldn't turn in either direction. In that moment, Jessica regretted not changing the lock in time. The lock had jammed a few times before, but it always worked itself out, and Jessica would make it inside. Now, it seemed like she had used up her luck. At that moment, her phone rang. Jessica checked the screen, and the number was unknown to her, but she decided to answer. "Hello," a male voice said. In surprise, Jessica remained silent for the first few seconds. "It's Vincent," the voice added. "Hello," Jessica replied. "Where did you get my number?" she asked immediately. "From your colleague at work?" Vincent replied. "All right, listen, I can't talk right now. I need to deal with the front door. Let's catch up later," the girl said, wanting to end the conversation quickly. "What happened? Do you need help?" Vincent immediately inquired, wanting to assist the girl. "Well, it's not that serious. I think I can handle it myself," Jessica tried to wriggle out, regretting her earlier slip of words. "Jessica, I would be more than happy to help you. What happened? You can rely on me. I can come over right now," Vincent persisted, explaining the situation to him. Jessica hadn't expected her new friend's swift response. Within 10 minutes, a locksmith was at her door. In a short time, he installed an entirely new lock and, without taking any payment, left. Jessica closed the door from the inside and sent Vincent a message of gratitude. She was truly grateful to him. Returning to work the next day, she once again saw the familiar face at the club. In a white shirt and a blue blazer, Vincent had a distinguished appearance. He exuded an air of reliability and self-confidence, someone you could trust. However, Jessica wasn't eager to dive into the game just yet. She kept her distance. After performing the scheduled routines for the evening, Jessica prepared to head home. To her surprise, he was waiting for her downstairs with a bouquet of flowers. Large, purple rosebuds captured her attention. "I have a small compliment for you," Vincent said, offering Jessica the exquisite bouquet. She was flustered, but she couldn't refuse. "Thank you," she replied. Bright, yellow streaks and jagged lines sparkled in the sky. A chilly wind had arisen. Vincent opened the car door and offered to give her a ride. "No, no, I'll manage on my own. I have a taxi waiting for me." Jessica tried to decline. After saying goodbye, she headed to where her taxi usually waited. However, the car wasn't there. At that moment, it seemed like someone had overturned a barrel in the sky, and large, cold raindrops poured down. Jessica turned around, and Vincent was still standing there. His white shirt was soaked, and thin rain streaks trickled from his forehead. "Please, agree," he said. His words reminded Jessica of a devil's temptation she couldn't resist. Without consulting her rational thoughts, her feet carried her towards Vincent. The man opened the car door again, and Jessica got in. The car was new and quite expensive. The luxurious interior and the spare shirt hanging there made that evident. Jessica was surprised by the owner's foresight. "I want to make it clear that I'm not currently in a phase of my life to seek a significant other," Jessica said, looking directly into Vincent's eyes with all seriousness. For a while, the man looked into her eyes and then couldn't hold back his laughter. "What's so funny?" The girl didn't understand. "I just want to be upfront with you. I can't focus on my boyfriend right now," she repeated, trying her best to convey her meaning. "I'm not your boyfriend," Vincent calmly replied and then started the car. Jessica gave him a puzzled look. The movement of the car forced her to focus on the road. Rain was obscuring the windshield. "Vincent, I think you didn't take my words seriously," Jessica said, returning to her previous concern. "Jessica, I'm in town for business for a week," he began. "I've rented an apartment for a month. You can stay there," he said without taking his eyes off the road. Jessica didn't know how to respond. "Thank you, but I have a home," she replied. Vincent reached into his bag and put his hand in it. Then he took out some keys and handed them to her. "Here, take the keys. Everything is already paid for. If you need anything, just let me know," he said. Vincent spoke calmly, without any grandeur or ulterior motives. Jessica appreciated that. It was appealing, yet it also raised her suspicions. "I'm going to France in a couple of months. Will you come with me?" Vincent asked, surprising Jessica once again. In response, she just smiled, thinking he was playing with her. "Listen, Vincent, thank you for saving me from the rain," Jessica said, trying to be delicate. "But I'm better off going home. I'm incredibly tired, and I'm about to collapse, honestly." Vincent didn't look at the girl. He remained focused on the road. In about 15 minutes, the car stopped at the entrance to the Dacia Cooperative. The rain, having washed the earth, had subsided, leaving behind numerous puddles and a fresh breeze. "Thanks, I'll take it from here," Jessica said, bidding Vincent farewell. He didn't insist. In fact, he liked the girl's enigmatic aura. Jessica got out of the car, and within a couple of steps, her feet were in the water. Entering her home, she undressed, filled a basin with water, and washed herself. Afterward, wrapped in a blanket, she fell asleep. Jessica woke up around 1 in the afternoon. The wind was howling outside. It was a cold wind, and it seeped through various cracks and crevices, filling the cabin with a chill. Jessica got out of bed and turned on the heater. After washing her face, she brewed a fresh, aromatic tea. Suddenly, Vincent's offer to stay in the apartment crossed her mind. Warm, always clean cold and hot water. Jessica thawed as she added hot water to her cup. She turned on a small radio. Pleasant foreign music began to play. It was unhurried, creating an atmosphere of relaxation and coziness. Jessica then made herself some porridge and sliced a couple of pieces of cheese. Settling on the couch, she started her favorite comedy show on the computer. The house gradually warmed up, and Jessica felt the warmth spreading through her after a hearty breakfast. Her body was aching from the prolonged tension. Sitting on the rug, she assumed a split position. "Oh, how nice it is to do this after a good sleep," she thought. Jessica enjoyed her job, but lately, she had been feeling a growing fatigue and a desire to change something in her life. However, she didn't want to give up because the opportunity to buy her own apartment was on the horizon. "Patience. I need more patience," she repeated to herself. But Vincent, with his gentle, pleasant smile, lingered in her mind. He was like a seducer, offering very tempting opportunities, but Jessica held her ground. Despite having the keys in her pocket, she hadn't visited the apartment. However, after 2 weeks, looking at the bag filled with laundry and a washing machine that had stopped spinning for some reason, she somehow found a compelling reason to finally check out the apartment. After a moment of contemplation, Jessica decided to go to the address Vincent had given her. Using the key to open the door, she discovered that no one was in the apartment. She searched the kitchen, the living room, and the bathroom but found none of his belongings. Moreover, everything was so clean and tastefully decorated that Jessica sat down in silence for a while, taking in the surroundings. Large, bright windows, the walls, the furniture, everything was so easy on the eyes that a smile involuntarily appeared on Jessica's face. Automatically, she opened the fridge and was surprised by the variety of food inside. Doubts briefly crossed her mind, but she pushed them aside. Shedding her clothes, she started a load of laundry and then headed to the bathroom. Jessica lay amid the voluminous foam bubbles, trying to comprehend her presence in this place. She had to admit that she regretted not coming here sooner. A week later, someone knocked on the door. It was the apartment owner. He had come to check if everything was in order and to collect the keys. Jessica thanked him politely for the apartment and then ordered a taxi to return to her own home. With his thoughtful gifts and attention, Vincent had gained Jessica's favor. He wasn't overly intrusive, and he didn't criticize her. He genuinely, selflessly helped her in the matters she allowed him to assist with. Unknowingly, she was getting more and more attached. Help with various household chores, dining at the finest restaurants, obtaining a driver's license. Jessica's life had turned into a fairy tale. However, let's add a little more color to this story. One day, when Vincent once again came to town for his business, he was in a great hurry. An important person was waiting for him in this city, someone who could open up new avenues for Vincent's timber business. The meeting went successfully. The two of them sealed a contract. Vincent had finally achieved what he wanted, and now he was happy and full of energy as he headed to meet Jessica. It was her day off. Well rested and relaxed, she flopped down in the passenger seat. Vincent kissed her on the cheek and started the car. With a familiar motion, he put his hand on the steering wheel, turning it to the right. Jessica observed how effortlessly and confidently he controlled his car when suddenly, her gaze fell upon the engagement ring on his ring finger. "Vincent, are you married?" she asked, as if it wasn't already obvious from what she had seen. "Oh, yes, I completely forgot to tell you," Vincent said quite calmly. "I am married. Does that scare you?" he inquired. "No, it doesn't scare me, but..." Jessica furrowed her brow, trying to process what she had just learned. "Does that change anything between us?" Vincent asked again, gazing straight ahead. "Why didn't you tell me sooner?" Jessica responded to his question with a question. "You didn't ask, but I would have told you anyway. Yes, I have a wife and 2 children. So what? Am I not allowed to have a family?" Vincent asked, as if Jessica had raised an incredible and very silly objection. "You know, Vincent, I'm not ready for this meeting today," Jessica managed to say. She opened the car door and stepped out. Vincent remained in the car. A few seconds later, he rushed after her, but Jessica had already crossed the road and boarded a bus. Vincent looked around. She was nowhere to be seen. He got back into his car and drove back to his rental apartment alone. Jessica took the bus and couldn't stop thinking about the shocking truth that had just unfolded. How? She kept asking herself. Why did it turn out this way? These questions kept spinning in her mind. She gazed out the window as cars passed by and pedestrians walked along. Lost in her thoughts, she wanted to escape from what had happened but snapped out of it only when she found herself at the airport's terminal. Final stop, the driver announced for the second time, specifically for Jessica. She got off at the stop and began walking on foot. She walked and walked for a long time until she stopped. Rain began to fall again. It's rare for autumn to be so warm and sunny, and this time, Jessica was grateful for the infrequent large raindrops. They felt like they were bringing her back to her senses and comforting her. After 2 hours of walking, Jessica finally took a minibus and went back home. She took off her shoes and turned on the heater. She tried to distract herself, but her thoughts kept returning to him. In an attempt to escape from what had happened, Jessica blocked Vincent on all her messaging apps. The following week passed in complete peace. Jessica continued her work, trying to get the young man out of her mind. But Vincent had no intention of letting go of Jessica just like that. He liked her. He liked the emotions she brought. After several days of trying to contact Jessica, he finally succeeded. "Jessica, you finally picked up the phone." "Hello," Vincent said. How thrilled Jessica was to hear his voice. "Hello," Jessica replied, keeping herself in check, even though she wanted to scream about how much she missed him. "Please don't hang up," he said so tenderly. "I'd like to meet you to explain that I was wrong. I didn't take your feelings into account at all. I just didn't realize how important this was for you," Vincent said, his voice sounding like that of a boy who regretted his actions. Jessica agreed to meet him. More than anything in the world, she wanted to see him. "Aren't you supposed to be out of town?" Jessica asked when they met at a cozy little restaurant. "I did leave, but I unexpectedly received a call that my documents are ready, so I had to go back," Vincent explained. "I need to be in Paris in 3 days," he added, taking a sip of tea that the waiter had just brought. He also placed a couple of salads, steaks, and roasted vegetables on the table. Jessica eyed the hot dishes. "Is all of this for us?" she blurted out. Vincent chuckled. "Yes, you always order a lot of food," he replied. "Are you coming with me?" he asked, looking at her seriously. "Yes," she suddenly replied. Inside, she felt a wave of excitement as if she shouldn't have agreed. Well, when if not now, Jessica thought. 2 days later, the two of them were driving on the highway from Madrid to Paris. Colorful trees with orange and red leaves passed by. The clear blue sky and bright sun put them in a good mood. They stopped at a gas station, and Jessica went into a convenience store. She grabbed a couple of teacups and a Snickers. Returning to the car, she handed half of the Snickers to Vincent. He looked at her in surprise. "Would you like some?" she asked. Her face took on a childlike quality. Vincent looked at her with affection and took half of the bar, barely holding back a laugh. He found it amusing to watch her. After all, he was used to spending substantial amounts of money every day. Jessica noticed that after every visit to a restaurant or cafe, Vincent always left generous tips and often left half of the ordered food behind. For him, it was routine, just like buying expensive clothing or dining at fine establishments. They were quite different in this regard. "If you need anything, just say the word." "I'll give you money," Vincent said, making sure Jessica had heard him. "Okay," Jessica replied, but felt herself shrinking inside. She understood that they were very different. Jessica was too reserved and constrained. On stage, she could assume a role, put on a mask, and play her part with full sincerity. In her everyday life, she was different. She put in a lot of effort to shift her center to make guests believe her performance. But on regular days, she was just a simple girl living essentially in a village near the city. She tried to maintain her home well, dressed decently, and hoped that someday she would be able to buy her own apartment. Unlike Vincent, she wasn't accustomed to spending money on herself. She wasn't accustomed to eating in restaurants, leaving not only tips but also half of her order behind. She wasn't accustomed to buying expensive clothes, and she knew that Vincent, to some extent, despised the world in which she lived. The couple checked into a nice hotel near a green park and a massive shopping center. On the first day of their arrival, Vincent and Jessica went to the shopping center. "Listen, Jessica, I need to buy school uniforms for the kids here," Vincent began. Jessica felt a slight pang at his words but concealed it well. Knowing that Vincent was married meant that this shouldn't bother her. She had made her choice. Vincent continued, "I'll go to the school department where I always buy their clothes. In the meantime, you can head upstairs and pick out something for yourself," Vincent suggested. His expression was so relaxed and open that Jessica readily agreed. Vincent disappeared around the corner, and Jessica went up the escalator. Before her lay a multitude of boutiques with women's clothing. She entered the first one she came across, examining dresses one by one. With each passing moment, her excitement grew. She marveled at the pink and burgundy dresses, some with long sleeves and delicate lace. "What a beauty," Jessica thought to herself. A slender saleswoman in a white blouse with red lipstick on her lips approached the young woman. "You can try the dresses in the fitting room over there," she pointed with her hand. Jessica smiled warmly at her, taking a couple of dresses with her as she made her way to the dressing room. She put on the first dress, a beige one with golden threads. It accentuated her figure perfectly and looked magnificent. The second one, a burgundy dress with three-quarter sleeves, looked absolutely stunning. Then, the saleswoman's voice broke through. "Take a look at these similar styles. You're sure to love them." She handed Jessica several more outfits. Jessica tried on the dresses, and with each one, her eyes sparkled brighter. "Oh my, everything is so beautiful," Jessica uttered while admiring her reflection. She had forgotten when was the last time she bought dresses for everyday life. The fitting was interrupted by a phone call. It was Vincent, who had already found what he was looking for. Jessica told him her location, and Vincent immediately headed upstairs to meet her. Jessica happily displayed the dresses, unable to decide which one was the best. Vincent seemed a bit tired, but despite that, he enthusiastically reviewed all the outfits and concluded, "Take them all and let's go." "Everything?" Jessica couldn't believe it, looking at the dresses she held. "Of course, you like them all, so we'll take them all," Vincent said. Astonished, Jessica headed to the cashier. The cashier rang up the purchases and named a not insignificant sum. However, Vincent, his face showing no sign of concern, paid for the purchases. Jessica couldn't hide her surprise. The cashier smiled ever so slightly, as if she shared the girl's joy. Vincent and Jessica returned to their hotel room. It was as beautiful as all the other apartments that Vincent rented during his business trips. Jessica felt something strange inside when she was with him. He was a caring, generous, well-off man, but at the same time, she felt that he was a stranger. The trips in a nice car, the delicious meals in restaurants, the comfortable apartments, it was all wonderful, but it was as if it was just a facade, a set of decorations that prevented her from seeing the real Vincent. In Paris, Vincent quickly wrapped up his business, and then they visited an amusement park together before returning to Madrid. This time, Vincent left the car behind and flew back to his hometown by plane. Jessica saw him off at the airport. "Jessica, I have a request," Vincent suddenly said, turning to her. "A request?" Jessica was surprised. "Could you consider giving up your late-night performances at the club?" he asked, holding her hand. This request took Jessica by surprise. "I can't promise you that," she replied honestly. "Please think about it," he said, then disappeared into the security checkpoint. Jessica left the airport building, a sense of longing settling in her chest. Seating herself on the bus, she headed home. Jessica was shocked at how she had quickly and unexpectedly recalled a significant part of her past. The walk had indeed been therapeutic. She returned to the convent. It was pleasant to enter the warm building after a long walk in the fresh and chilly air. "Did you stay out on the street for so long today? Didn't you get cold, my dear?" Kiernan asked. Jessica thanked her for the concern, gazing into the kind eyes of this sweet woman and pondering that she didn't know what Jessica had done in the past. If she knew, she might change her attitude toward her and her opinion of her. This thought frightened Jessica. She didn't want to be seen in that light by Kiernan. She entered her room. It was quiet and warm, and there was no one around. No one could witness what was happening to Jessica at the moment. She looked out the window. Snow fell from the sky in heavy flakes. The wind played with it, scattering it all around. Jessica walked to the window. The sound of a car drew her attention. It was a small delivery truck, usually arriving for their products. But today was Sunday, not Monday. No one exited the vehicle. A little later, the door to Jessica's room burst open, and Elizabeth walked in. "Jessica, let's go. Help me unload the shipments. The girls who were supposed to do it are in the city today. It's their day off," Elizabeth said hurriedly. "Yes, of course," Jessica replied, putting on her warm coat, which had been issued to her not too long ago. The two girls quickly unloaded the boxes of bedding and towels. Jessica rushed to avoid keeping the driver waiting. She carried a box. The snow made it difficult to see the man who had arrived at their doorstep. Finally, she placed the box on the table near the gates and quickly glanced at him. He greeted her, and again, Jessica felt as if she knew him. Meeting his eyes, she couldn't look away. His intense blue eyes were captivating. "Jessica," Aaron suddenly asked her, staring at her as if he were taken aback by something. Jessica's heart began to race. "Oh God, what else could I have done?" raced through her mind. "Jessica," he repeated. However, in her panic, the girl fled from his gaze. She was so frightened that she saw only one way to save herself: to run. She ran through the monastery courtyard, where the fallen snow created additional difficulties. Her feet sank and slipped in it. Jessica made her way back inside the monastery, struggling to catch her breath. Kiernan appeared in the corridor. "What happened? Are you okay?" she asked, carefully examining Jessica's face. Jessica pretended to adjust her scarf. "Yes, everything's fine. I'm just in a hurry so as not to keep the drivers waiting," Jessica lied, walking into the room where the remaining supplies were stored. "Jessica, remember, you mustn't get too worked up. You haven't fully recovered yet," Kiernan cautioned with maternal concern. "Yes, thank you for caring," Jessica replied, forcing a smile. Her sudden change in temperature made her feel overheated. Soon, Elizabeth entered. "Why did you run away?" she asked, looking at her partner in bewilderment. "Elizabeth, it's Turnbull," Jessica said softly, handing her the last box and tearfully asking her not to answer him and not to talk about her. She continued, "Please, I'll explain everything later," she added firmly. "Please." Elizabeth looked at Kiernan, who was in the room opposite. It seemed she hadn't heard anything. Then Elizabeth looked back at Jessica and nodded in response. Jessica glanced around one more time. Beth, one of the older women in the monastery, gave her a sidelong look. Aaron was waiting for the last batch of shipments, and Elizabeth placed the last box on the table. "What happened? Why did you decide to stop by on a Sunday?" Elizabeth asked, brushing the snow off her bangs. "I have to leave tomorrow, and they couldn't find a driver for the truck. That's why I came today to at least get part of it done," Aaron explained. "I see. Now it makes sense, Aaron," Elizabeth replied. Aaron secretly found her attractive. It seemed to her that he was interested in her too. "Excuse me, Elizabeth, but who is that other girl?" She rushed to leave so quickly. "Has she recently joined you?" Aaron inquired. "No, she's just very private. She doesn't like being in public. The other girls went for a walk, so we had to call upon whoever was in the chapel for help," Elizabeth fabricated, trying not to reveal the truth. Inside, though, she was a little disappointed that Aaron hadn't asked about her. "I see. Well, I'd better be going," the man replied. After bidding them goodbye, he got into his car and drove away. Elizabeth stood there, watching him leave. The wind ruffled her scarf and coat. She walked back into the monastery, reminding herself that you can't throw away or hide genuine human emotions. You can't forbid yourself to love when your soul demands it. "Well, did he leave?" Jessica impatiently asked her, barely waiting for her to enter the sewing room. "Yes," Elizabeth replied. "Tell me, how did it go?" Jessica asked, taking her hands and sitting her down on a bench along the wall by the window. "He didn't ask anything about you." "Don't worry," Elizabeth replied. At the moment, she was more interested in her own feelings. "Nothing at all?" Jessica asked again. Elizabeth's response seemed somewhat unconvincing to her. "He just asked, 'Have you been here long?'" Elizabeth said, studying Jessica's facial features. She was assessing her in her mind, wondering whether she was truly beautiful or just average. Without coming to a conclusion, Elizabeth walked over to her work table. She wanted to start working, but then remembered that nobody worked on Sundays and set the sewing aside. "Do you know him?" Elizabeth asked Jessica. Jessica took a deep breath. Elizabeth's question had stirred up something she didn't want to touch. However, it seemed the time had come for her memories to return, along with everything she had done. Elizabeth's question only accelerated this process. Jessica's brain began to recall everything that connected her to Aaron, and she delved into her memories. One day, when Vincent had come to town again on business, he had arranged a meeting with Jessica. Jessica had driven to the cafe, but Vincent wasn't alone. His longtime friend, Aaron, was with him. Aaron was 7 years younger than Vincent. When Vincent came to town for business, Aaron, for an additional fee, took care of his car. He parked it, took it for servicing, and handled it while Vincent attended to his affairs. Vincent ordered a round of tea for everyone. Within 5 minutes, white saucers and cups filled with hot tea were on the table. Vincent introduced Jessica to Aaron. The young man seemed to be holding back from staring at his friend's girlfriend, which Jessica could sense. "How's the tea?" Vincent asked, trying to break the silence that had grown into awkward tension. "Good tea," Jessica replied, taking another sip of the hot green liquid. "Good tea." Aaron chuckled, repeating her words. Vincent noticed this strange smirk and turned his gaze to Jessica. She raised the corners of her lips. After a brief discussion, Vincent and Jessica were getting ready to leave together, while Aaron had to take care of Vincent's car. Vincent got up from the table, took out his wallet, and handed Aaron a $100 bill. Jessica couldn't help but smirk to herself. In that moment, she felt as though Vincent was some kind of charitable foundation that generously gifted his friends with banknotes. Aaron remained motionless, experiencing a sense of awkwardness due to his subservient position to Vincent. Jessica and Vincent exited the cafe and headed straight to a shoe store. Vincent wanted to buy Jessica a pair of winter boots. He patiently waited for Jessica to pick the right style. While browsing through the shop windows, Vincent made some remarks about her appearance. "What's with that puffer jacket you're wearing?" he asked with a hint of irritation. Jessica examined herself. She was wearing a long, dark green puffer jacket she had recently bought with her own money. "It looks kind of ugly," Vincent added, then switched his disapproving gaze to her hat. But Jessica didn't take his opinion into account. She really liked her puffer jacket and the hat she had chosen for herself. So, she simply let his words pass her by. "You should go for this one," Vincent said, pointing to a bright pink puffer coat with a fluffy skirt. It looked more like a ballroom dress than everyday attire. Jessica smiled, thinking he was joking. However, when Jessica selected a pair of brown leather boots with a low heel, Vincent was also somewhat disappointed with her choice. "I thought you'd go for something like these," he said, pointing to black, high-heeled boots. A thought crossed Jessica's mind that she didn't quite meet his expectations. It seemed as though he wanted a princess in pink by his side. She noticed this, but she wasn't going to change her choice to high heels just because Vincent preferred it. However, Jessica was also surprised at how easily this man had parted with a significant sum of money for the purchases. After the shopping, they went to a cafe and then returned to the rented apartment. Vincent undressed and flopped onto the bed. He was a bit tired from traveling and walking around the city. Jessica approached him and climbed onto the bed as well. They lay together, enjoying each other's company. After some tenderness, Vincent grabbed his tablet and began to review some documents. Jessica watched him for a while, then headed to the kitchen. This time she brought a book with her so she wouldn't sit idle. It was strange, but beyond their outings to cafes and shops, there wasn't much that connected Vincent and her. Jessica felt it, albeit uncertainly, almost imperceptibly, but it was there. Most likely, she had been living in some illusion of their happy meetings. Jessica remembered how she eagerly anticipated Vincent's arrival, how delighted she was to see him, and how her desire surged when they embraced. Yet, she wasn't receiving the same in return from Vincent. Vincent, a married man raising 2 children, wanted Jessica to remain a bright, cheerful, and joyful girl in his life, always amazed and delighted by him. But Jessica was a living person too. She couldn't be expected to be delighted by him every minute. "Listen, I need to step out for a bit. Will you wait for me?" Vincent asked. As he said this, his gaze was so attentive. Each word was spoken with care and caution. "Yes, of course," Jessica replied. She couldn't forbid him from going wherever he had in mind. In a couple of minutes, Jessica found herself alone in the apartment. She was surrounded by everything so beautiful, clean, and foreign. "Why am I here?" she asked herself. "Why did I meet him again? Is this love, or maybe not?" she contemplated. "Perhaps it's time for me to move on. But it seems I can't," Jessica thought, adjusting the bedspread. "I don't want to suffer." Stop. Why am I even thinking of suffering? She suddenly questioned herself. I can just use Vincent as an opportunity. Jessica reclined on the bed, stretching her arms out to the sides. An opportunity to try and fulfill my dream. She felt lighter with this conclusion. She had come up with a reason for why she was still with another manual in the absence of other options. She let this thought linger in her mind for now. Soon, Vincent returned. After changing, they went to a restaurant for dinner. This was how their meetings went, filled with shopping, dining at restaurants, and staying in rented apartments. Jessica felt like she was wandering among beautiful decorations of a potential life, as if someone was showing her a demo version, just a demo version without feelings. After dinner, they returned to the apartment. Jessica's thoughts about not belonging there surfaced again. Vincent's phone rang, and he pressed a finger to his lips. "It's Peyton. I'll be quick," he said and headed to the bathroom. Peyton was his wife. In that moment, Jessica experienced very strange feelings. She had never been in the role of a mistress before. She even felt sorry for his wife. She didn't want to cause her pain. After all, she knew the suffering of loving someone, but she didn't want to let Vincent go either. Vincent returned very quickly. A smile beamed on his face, as if something had delighted him greatly. He hopped on the bed and covered Jessica, who was lying on her stomach, reading a book. "Why are you in such a good mood? Did your wife do something to make you so happy?" she asked. "Oh, nothing. She told me she had a dream with arrows today. Can you believe it?" he said, looking into Jessica's cat-like eyes, which, as they were, made arrows. "Well, that's something. Peyton has good intuition," Jessica said. She didn't like this conversation at all, but you could tell that Vincent enjoyed such games, and they brightened his mood. "How disgusting," Jessica thought. "How did I get myself into these relationships?" Vincent's kiss made her forget everything else. Late in the evening, Vincent informed her that he would be heading back to Paris soon. He planned to register a business there. "I want you to come with me. Will you go?" he asked. Jessica remained silent. She didn't want to disappoint him, but she also didn't want to feel like a girl for entertainment and good moods. Before she could respond, he added, "Think about it. There's still time." He playfully touched the tip of her nose with his index finger. Jessica raised the corners of her lips to avoid appearing gloomy. With each passing day, she realized that she didn't like this arrangement, especially after witnessing Vincent speaking to his wife. She didn't want to be part of that. "Jessica, I wanted to ask you," Vincent began again. "Have you quit your job yet?" "No. How can I just quit? What will I live on?" she asked, a reasonable question. "I will help you," Vincent replied promptly. He was genuinely someone you could trust. "Sorry, I can't just trust you like that," Jessica replied. "I need money not only for food and clothes. I have my own plans and goals," she explained. "For instance, I plan to buy an apartment," she added. "I actually thought we would go to Paris together. I would buy you an apartment there, and later, we could find you a job, maybe as an accountant," he said. Jessica's surprise turned into laughter. "An accountant?" she asked. "Vincent, let's be honest. Not only do I know nothing about that field, but I also never intended to work in that profession. Do you think I started earning money through dancing because I'm so poor and miserable?" she inquired. Vincent was taken aback. Jessica's mood had suddenly changed. "I love dancing. I enjoy performing and amazing the audience," Jessica declared, not quite understanding why she had such a strong reaction. "The audience, or the men?" Vincent corrected her with a hint of disdain in his voice. "Fine, I'm coming to Paris," Jessica began to reason. "On the other hand, what role will I have there?" she asked assertively. But Vincent had never anticipated Jessica asserting her rights. "As my girlfriend," he replied. Jessica burst into laughter. "And how long will you last?" "6 months." Jessica got out of bed and began pacing around the apartment. She felt a growing tension that had been building up and now wanted to break free. "Jessica, calm down." Vincent got up and tried to embrace her. "You know, among my acquaintances, it's normal for businessmen to have 2 families, Vincent explained, persisting in his argument. "2 families? How does that work?" Jessica didn't understand. She tried to break free from Vincent's embrace, but he held on. "For successful businessmen, it's common. It's just normal," Vincent said. "Even when we meet with friends, they all have 2 families." Jessica was shocked by this unusual tradition among Vincent's circle of friends. "I don't know what to say," she replied, freeing herself from his grasp, grabbing a book, and heading to the kitchen to read. Vincent decided not to pursue this topic any further. He took his tablet and flopped onto the bed. Jessica attempted to distract herself with reading, but what Vincent had just revealed continued to haunt her thoughts. After spending a couple more days together, Vincent returned to his hometown. Jessica went back to her own home, and this time, she was in incredible agony. She realized that she needed to end her involvement with this man, but it was incredibly difficult to do. She slumped to the floor in front of her bed and cried. How she wished she could break this bond. But she lacked the strength and courage. The next day, Vincent called Jessica. "Jessica, Hello, I still insist that you stop working at night. It's harmful to a woman's body, he began. Jessica didn't know what to say. She had no intention of giving up her well-paying job. I'm willing to help you buy an apartment. So tell me, what would you like to do? He asked, as usual, out of the blue. Jessica began to think. In her small head, she had a couple of ideas she'd never dared to pursue before. I'd like to open my own small fitness studio. But I know it's costly and will take time, Jessica said. However, she was almost certain that Vincent would agree. Okay, I understand. Do you know how to start? How to organize everything properly? He asked, just to be sure. Yes, I have experience in group management, but I'm not sure if I can make this studio successful or not. It's a risky venture, Jessica replied. I understand, but if you want to do this, let's give it a try first. If it doesn't work out, we'll find something else. Just promise me that you won't dance in the nightclub anymore, he said. Jessica hesitated to respond. Do you promise? He asked. I promise, the girl replied. She was touched by his attitude towards her and his serious approach to the matter. She had long dreamed of opening a small, cozy fitness studio for women. She assumed Vincent would likely agree, but his decision was still unpredictable for her. So, with just one phone call, they decided to find a suitable location and purchase the necessary equipment. A week later, Vincent returned to Madrid. He helped Jessica find a good space, bought office furniture, flooring, and everything needed for the fitness studio. Jessica was thrilled. Her long-standing dream had come true so suddenly and swiftly. Jessica, let's agree that I'll cover the rent for 6 months, okay? After that, we'll see how it goes. If it works out, it works. If not, it doesn't, he said with a serious look. Of course, Jessica agreed. She was already very grateful for Vincent's generosity. In truth, Jessica wasn't prepared for this turn of events. She had never thought her dream would come true someday. Vincent acted like a real man. He became an example for Jessica of a man who kept his word and wasn't afraid of taking on responsibilities. 4 days later, Vincent left again. Jessica stayed behind. She quit her previous job, devoting all her energy to developing the studio. She woke up early, distributed flyers, conducted surveys, attracted people, led training sessions, and tried to fill up the classes as quickly as possible. However, it wasn't as easy as she had anticipated. People showed up reluctantly. Many didn't attend, refused, or missed sessions. Jessica was getting tired. Additionally, the cold month of November had arrived, and the low temperatures made it challenging to stay outside for long. Jessica began to realize she wasn't handling things well. Either the location was wrong in the city center, or she was not dedicating enough time to attract clients. She returned home exhausted. She loved how the studio had turned out. She enjoyed conducting the workouts, but it was difficult to find people committed to long-term training. Women, by nature, were fickle beings. They attended for 2 days, then skipped a day. Jessica was starting to get disappointed that she couldn't meet Vincent's expectations. She felt ashamed and embarrassed. Furthermore, the income from her training sessions hardly covered anything beyond food. By the end of December, people were busy preparing for Christmas, and January was filled with festivities. Difficult times were upon her. Vincent's lack of communication further complicated matters. Initially, he would call and even consider buying 2 tickets to Paris, but Jessica declined. She needed to find people for her training sessions and promote the studio. She couldn't just leave her business behind. Vincent was disappointed but understanding of her words. In January, things took a turn for the worse. There was no increase in clients. Jessica realized that at this rate, she wouldn't be able to gather the required number of people to cover the rent and sustain herself within 6 months. One morning, Jessica woke up early as usual to head to the studio. She turned on the tap to get some water, but nothing came out. Jessica checked the pump socket and tried again with no success. The pump showed no signs of life. Just what I needed, she muttered to herself. Without washing up, she went to work. After conducting 2 training sessions, she spent the morning conducting surveys to attract people. However, people were reluctant to engage. They were all in a hurry and not interested in distractions. Using her last bit of money, Jessica bought some food. When she returned home, She filled a pot with water she had brought from a stream and cooked some macaroni. Afterward, she decided to call Vincent. However, he didn't answer the phone. Jessica wasn't just lost. She was furious. She was angry with Vincent, angry with herself for agreeing to this situation. Where can I get the funds to repair this pump? She asked herself out loud. Please pick up, Jessica said, dialing his number again, but it was in vain. There was no answer. Jessica felt a deep sense of sadness. She felt terrible. After preparing her macaroni, she could only eat a couple of spoonfuls before she sent a message to Vincent. She explained the situation with the pump and asked for financial assistance for its repair. Vincent took a long time to respond. Finally, after 3 hours, he sent his partner Aaron's phone number and wrote, "Call him." Such a short message completely caught her off guard. She wasn't ready for this abrupt change in Vincent's behavior. Now she was more worried about what happened to Vincent. Why did he stop communicating with her? Just a week ago, he had suggested going to Paris together. And now she was all alone, without a job, without money, and with a studio that had become an incredible burden. Jessica was filled with despair and pain over the way Vincent had treated her, a man she had considered decent and reliable. She agonized over the questions. Why did he suddenly stop communicating with her? What had she done? Yes, she wanted this herself, but not at a time when her life was filled with difficulties. Listening to Vincent, she dialed Aaron's number. With a calm voice, Jessica explained the situation to him. At first, Aaron didn't seem particularly interested, but he came to her the next day. He didn't come alone. He was accompanied by another guy. Obviously, he knew something about pumps. In part, Jessica felt uncomfortable showing Aaron her living space. For his and Vincent's standards, it was poor. A small room, a brick stove, plastic sinks, and the pump located in the basement. But Jessica didn't care. She only wanted one thing: for the pump to work, or, at the very least, to know the reason for its breakdown. Should we move the sink? Jessica asked, trying to make some room. No, there's enough space, the stranger replied. Jessica patiently waited for the verdict. When the technician finally came out, he didn't step lightly and lost his balance, bumping into the sink and knocking over a bucket used for collecting used water. The bucket tipped over, and dirty water spread across the floor. Jessica was so embarrassed by this, she rushed to grab a cloth to collect the water back into the bucket. In the cramped space, everyone was getting in each other's way. Unexpectedly for Jessica, Aaron helped her restore order. The box burned. We need to buy a new one and install it. That's it, the technician replied casually. That's it, Jessica joyfully confirmed, relieved of the burden of extra expenses. Well, then, boil some water, Aaron suggested. Unfortunately, I've run out of MIGs, she replied without a hint of regret. Where's your husband then? Aaron asked, which left Jessica discouraged. Perhaps he thought that a 20-year-old girl couldn't live alone in a private house. I don't have a husband, she replied, feeling uncomfortable. What do you mean? You don't have a husband? You can't possibly be living here all alone, Aaron persisted. Aaron, if you think I'm going to justify myself, you're mistaken. If you don't believe me, it's your personal issue, Jessica replied. To be honest, she was angry with Vincent and all of his friends. After bidding farewell, the guys left. An hour later, Aaron returned alone with the necessary part. After about 20 minutes of tinkering, he managed to get the pump working. Clean water flowed from the tap once again. Joy lit up Jessica's face. Oh, thank you so much. That's wonderful. How much do I need to pay? She asked, taking out her wallet. Nothing at all, Aaron replied. Aaron, I don't want to owe you. Tell me how much, and I'll pay you, Jessica insisted. Jessica, I'm telling you, nothing, Aaron repeated. He then went to the coat rack and took a bag of groceries. These are for you, he said, placing the bag on the table. Thank you so much, but I have groceries. Jessica tried to deflect. Well, how about we have some tea then? Jessica hesitantly offered. With pleasure, Aaron chuckled. His face took on quite a pleasant expression. Jessica pulled various items from the bag: fish, sausage, cheese, sweets, fruits, and some vegetables. She was pleasantly surprised. Pouring hot tea into MIGs, she sat down at the table with Aaron. Perhaps Aaron knew something about Vincent, but Jessica deliberately refrained from asking him. A conversation blossomed between Aaron and Jessica. It wasn't very long, but it brought her peace and a good feeling inside. Aaron never once mentioned Vincent. This naturally bothered Jessica, but she didn't show it. After their tea, Aaron headed home. A few days later, Vincent appeared in person. He called and explained that he had a flat tire on the way to Paris and narrowly avoided an accident. He then said that a new customer from Italy received 2 wagons of poor quality timber, and the customer needed to receive another 10 such wagons. If all of the wood turned out to be of subpar quality, it would result in significant financial losses for Vincent. He also mentioned that he couldn't meet with Jessica until he sorted out his affairs. Jessica listened carefully to him. She empathized with him and tried to be supportive. All her resentment towards him vanished instantly. She was just happy to hear his voice at last. She listened to Vincent, nodding in response. It was as if she didn't even hear what he was saying. What mattered most to her was that he had re-established contact. Vincent talked about his affairs, but he never asked about how Jessica was doing. However, she was just grateful. She had no desire to talk about her inevitable failure. It was embarrassing and uncomfortable to admit to it. This call was the last. Subsequently, when Jessica called him or sent messages, she was told that the subscriber was out of the network's coverage area. Her messages never reached him. Jessica was going out of her mind. She held on with all her might not to plunge into deep despair. If only she had known how her encounter with this man would turn out, she would have never entered into this relationship. By the end of February, March was approaching. The dark and cold winter was gradually leaving the city. The sun shone brighter, and it was getting warmer and warmer outside. The first green grass had already appeared, and everything around indicated the beginning of a new life. Jessica had grown accustomed to the idea that Vincent had disappeared from her life forever. She should have expected this. A married man should only be with his wife, his legal wife, and Jessica was not such a wife. Of course, it wasn't without threatening messages, attempts to get answers to questions. What does all of this mean? Why didn't you tell me right away? Why did you treat me like this? I offered to break up, and you refused. All these questions, just like the desire to get answers to them, welled up from Jessica's soul along with her hot tears. She endured, she suffered. She learned a good lesson once and for all. From now on, she would never allow herself to be treated this way again. Fortunately, Jessica had learned to breathe anew. The upcoming summer offered new opportunities and new goals. Jessica closed her fitness studio. She realized that she could never have imagined what it was like to manage a fitness studio. Running your own studio involved much more than just conducting workouts. You also played the roles of a janitor, a marketer, a nutrition consultant, and a client acquisition manager. It was quite challenging for one person. At least, just wanting to own a studio was clearly not enough. Jessica had to admit that she hadn't handled it. But now, after recovering and becoming whole again, she returned to the club where she used to work. This time, she got a job as a costume seamstress. Jessica did her job well, with quality and reliability. She enjoyed what she was doing. She realigned her priorities, which were her main focus before meeting Vincent, and everything seemed to have settled down. Aaron occasionally called Jessica to check on her well-being. He behaved fairly unobtrusively, gently, and modestly. One day, he suggested meeting up with Jessica. She thought, why not? They met by the waterfront. The lovely weather made for a pleasant stroll. Aaron and Jessica walked along the river without hurrying, admiring the glimmers on the water, watching birds in flight, feeding ducks that swam by, and chatting about various topics. Jessica noticed that her conversations with Aaron were slightly different from those with Vincent. It seemed like Vincent deliberately aimed to impress Jessica with his financial capabilities. After all, he repeatedly asked her, "You probably think I'm like that, right? Going to expensive restaurants, leaving generous tips." At that moment, Jessica didn't pay much attention to his words. Perhaps because Vincent had managed to create the impression of a well-off and self-assured person with a highly successful business. Continuing to walk along the rocky shore, the couple suddenly saw a duck floundering in the bushes, unable to return to her family. "Oh," Jessica exclaimed. "What's wrong with her? She must be tangled up," she said with concern. Aaron looked in the same direction and saw a bird that was desperately struggling, trying to free itself from what seemed like a fishing line, and wind around its wings and feet. The duck was in the water, but fortunately not far from the shore. Aaron removed his shoes, took off his pants, and without hesitation waded into the water. The duck became agitated, flapping its wings even harder. Splashing Aaron, it began quacking and pecking its rescuer with its flat, wide beak. But Aaron remained undaunted. With gentle and deliberate movements, he untangled the dick's wings and feet. Jessica watched him in admiration, focusing on his hands, which held the bird securely while untangling it. Finally, the duck was freed and released, returning to her decklings, who promptly surrounded her. Aaron cupped water in his hands, washing his face. Shaking water droplets from his hands, he walked ashore and looked at Jessica. She was gazing at him without averting her eyes. There was something intimate and familiar about him. "You're wearing a very beautiful dress today," Aaron suddenly said. Jessica blushed. "Thank you," she replied, feeling that something special was happening between them. Two invisible threads drew them closer. Aaron reached out and took her hand, pulling her closer to him. Then he raised his hand to her cheek and used his thumb to wipe away a water droplet. Her full lips captivated his gaze, and her tender, youthful skin was enticingly velvety. Aaron studied Jessica's eyes, her upturned nose, her lips, and then returned to her eyelashes. But a young boy riding a scooter nearby lost control and nearly crashed into them. Aaron and Jessica managed to step aside, watching the child in amazement. Starting from that day, Aaron began calling Jessica more often. He grew increasingly interested in her life, her worries, her moods, and her plans. "Jessica, maybe we should start living together," Aaron proposed one day when he came to her place. Jessica was stringing beads onto cuffs for an upcoming costume. Such an offer took her by surprise. After setting the beads aside and pondering for a moment, she declined. "Aaron, I'll be honest with you. I'm not ready for such a step yet," she said. Silence hung in the air. Aaron was sure Jessica would agree. He felt the sting of rejection, as if he were competing with Vincent all over again. Even though Vincent was not there, he still felt like he was behind. "I'm sorry, I didn't mean to upset you," Jessica said, seeing Aaron's crestfallen expression. "No, I understand. We just need some time," Aaron reassured himself with these words. He took several beads in his hand. They were a rich shade of red and glistened in the sunlight. The sun's rays played inside the tiny glass beads, much like how Jessica playfully stirred Aaron's heart, settling within. "Now, look, did it turn out well?" Jessica asked, spreading a costume with an embroidered red dragon on semi-transparent mesh before him on the table. She ran her small fingers over the embroidery, and the pattern sparkled and drew the eye. "Yes, it looks magnificent," Aaron said, and unable to resist, he placed his hand over Jessica's. She raised the corners of her mouth and gazed into Aaron's deep blue eyes. In that moment, they emitted a hunter's look, intense and piercing, arousing incredible feelings in Jessica. Aaron took a step closer and wrapped his hand around her neck. Jessica didn't resist, and the intense desire that welled up within him started to consume her entirely. But, regaining control over herself, Jessica stepped back, her fingers instinctively touching her lips where the remnants of their shared kiss still lingered. Aaron tried to embrace Jessica again, but she blocked his path. "No, stop," Jessica said, pressing her hand against his chest. "Why?" Aaron barely managed to say, overwhelmed by his surging passion. "Maybe it's better if things remain the way they were," Jessica replied. She didn't know if she was making the right choice, but it felt entirely sincere. Aaron wanted to say something more, but a phone call interrupted him. He was called to the office. A fleeting thought crossed Aaron's mind that maybe this was for the best. "I need to go," he said, avoiding eye contact with Jessica. "Sure," Jessica replied curtly. She didn't want to disappoint Aaron, but she couldn't betray herself either. When Aaron left, she heaved a sigh of relief. Later that evening, Aaron called Jessica, apologized for his lack of restraint. As he listened to her voice, a pleasant joy spread throughout his body. They agreed to meet again. First, Aaron helped deliver the finished dress to the club for the girls who had ordered costumes. Afterward, they went for a walk. Even though it was approaching 6 in the evening, in the summertime, it didn't feel like it. The streets were still bathed in sunlight and warmth. The car stopped not far from the city, near the river bank. "Where have we arrived?" Jessica asked, surveying the surroundings. There was green grass and trees, but no billboards or buildings in sight. "I have a surprise for you," Aaron said, observing the growing curiosity in Jessica's eyes. He took her hand, and together, they approached the river. A boat appeared amidst the bushes. Jessica gasped. Aaron untied the rope from a branch. "Please," he exclaimed, extending his hand to Jessica. She climbed into the boat. Aaron strained, pulled the boat away from the shore, and then jumped in himself. Small ripples and circles spread across the water's surface. The coordinated effort of their hands set the boat in motion along the river. The pleasant sound of the water delighted their ears. Aaron easily propelled the small vessel and brought it closer to the middle of the river, but he didn't go any further. It was risky. Using the oars, Aaron spun the boat in a circle, eliciting giggles and laughter from Jessica. "How do you do that?" "I want to try." Jessica expressed her desire. Aaron generously handed over the oars, and Jessica's face took on a serious and focused expression. The oars in her hands seemed to be whispering to each other as she tried to coordinate their movements. "Stop. Wait," she finally said out loud. "If the right hand goes backward, then the left goes forward," Jessica said, watching her left hand, which was turning the oar in the wrong direction. "Let me show you," Aaron said, ready to take the oars back. No, wait, I'll figure it out." "Like this," Jessica mumbled. Aaron observed her, quietly admiring her girlish behavior. "Look, I got it," Jessica exclaimed as the boat made its first turn. "Yay, I can do it." She laughed. "Just don't jump in the boat. You might tip over." Aaron cautioned against excess activity and sudden movements. Jessica obediently settled back into her seat, her face radiant, her eyes lit up. After half an hour, Aaron steered the boat back to the shore. He jumped into the water to grab the rope and tie it to a branch, just like before, but his attention was diverted once again by a phone call. He jumped off, leaving Jessica alone. Within a minute, he was watching Jessica in the boat far from the shore. She was boldly rowing and waving at him. Jessica moved toward the shore. "This is no joke," Aaron shouted, but Jessica had entirely forgotten about safety. Placing the oars in their holders, she stood up, her arms outstretched, allowing the river's current to carry the boat along the shore. The cool river breeze brushed against her face as Jessica got lost in the sensations of her serene water journey. "Jessica, I agree you look amazing, and I'd love to keep looking at you, but it's not safe," Aaron reiterated, but Jessica appeared not to hear him. Meanwhile, waves were growing on the river, but Jessica, her eyes closed, paid no attention to the unfolding situation. Her attention was entirely absorbed by the river's glints and the wind that made her feel like she was flying weightlessly. In one moment, a strong wave struck the boat, quickly lifting its left side. Jessica staggered, and when she opened her eyes, it was too late. She lost her balance and tumbled overboard. Seeing this, Aaron's eyes widened, and he quickly shed his shoes and removed his upper clothing. He hadn't asked Jessica if she could swim. Jessica resurfaced, but instead of swimming towards the shore, she inexplicably tried to climb back into the boat. After several attempts, she finally managed to get back in. Exerting considerable effort, Jessica took the oars and obediently began rowing toward the shore. At that moment, she resembled a drenched and shivering kitten. Along the way, she met Aaron, who was paddling toward her. He wanted to scold her, but the fact that everything had ended safely overwhelmed his disapproval. He immediately took the oars and rowed to the shore. Jessica maintained an innocent smile on her face, mixed with a look of guilt. It all happened so suddenly. It was calm before. No wind, no ships, Jessica explained, shivering from the cold. Aaron shook his head in a negative response. Fortunately, there was a small cottage next to the boat. This cottage had been handed down to Aaron by his parents. It was modest and rather small, but it exuded coziness. Jessica stood at the doorstep, her wet hair clinging to her neck and collarbones, which were visible through her unbuttoned shirt. "Why are you just standing there?" Aaron asked with a smile. "Come in," he said, handing her a towel. However, the towel alone wouldn't save her. Cold water droplets dripped from her drenched clothes, forming a wet puddle on the floor. "Maybe you have some dry clothes or a blanket?" Jessica inquired. "Oh, right. Let me get that," he offered, disappearing into a small room. He returned with a blanket in hand. "You can use the room to take off your wet clothes," Aaron said, setting a kettle to boil. "Do you live here?" Jessica asked as she peeled off her clingy shirt. She was relieved to get out of the cold, wet attire and wrap herself in the warm blanket. She still had a lingering shiver. "No, I rent an apartment in the city. I mainly visit here during the summer," he replied. "Would you like tea with sugar and lemon?" Aaron offered. "Yes, please," Jessica responded, heading to the mostly combined kitchen and living room. Given the limited space, it was a practical arrangement. She settled on a soft couch, and Aaron handed her a cup of hot tea. The warm liquid filled her with comfort. Finally, Jessica was warming up, and Aaron started hanging her clothes on a makeshift drying rack. "Well, now you're my captive until your clothes dry," Aaron joked, then took a sip of his fresh tea. "It's so cozy here, and being by the river, it's just amazing," Jessica remarked, genuinely admiring the place. She wrapped herself in the blanket and approached the window to admire the view. An uninhabited and tranquil shore, a river with glimmers on its surface, and on the horizon, the sun was approaching sunset in a peach-colored sky. It left a thick golden strip on the water, creating a breathtaking landscape. "How beautiful," Jessica said. Aaron joined her by the window to witness the beauty together. Jessica reached forward to place her cup on the windowsill, but the edge of the blanket slipped down, exposing her body. Aaron crouched down, picked up the blanket, and slowly raised it, covering her hips, waist, and then her back. He reached her shoulders, embraced them with his hands, and pressed his lips to them. Aaron showered her shoulders with small kisses, hot and electrifying, stirring Jessica's emotions and inviting her to respond. The phone call woke her up early in the morning, and she answered. "Jessica, fabric delivery. You scheduled it for 8 a.m. today," said the courier waiting for her outside her house. Jessica's eyes widened as she had completely forgotten about the courier delivery. "Oh, I'm so sorry. I'm not at home right now. Could you please leave the order at the door?" Jessica mumbled with a still drowsy voice. The courier agreed, and Jessica hung up the phone before flopping back on the couch. Aaron ran his hand along her body. He had also woken up abruptly due to the phone call. He enclosed her in his strong embrace and didn't want to let her go. "Aaron, I need to go," Jessica said in a soft voice. "Today, I have to take measurements for 3 different costumes," she added, attempting to shake off her heavy sleepiness. "I don't want to let you go," Aaron said, still holding her close. "What about work?" she playfully replied. "Oh, this job," Aaron sighed as he got up from the bed. He washed up, prepared some tea, and made a couple of delicious sandwiches. Jessica couldn't help but watch him. In these moments, he was so caring and tender. After breakfast, Aaron drove Jessica to her workplace and then went about his own business. Jessica finished the fitting sessions, recorded all the necessary measurements, and coordinated the models with the clients. Afterward, she headed back home, where she planned to continue sewing. She decided to walk a couple of bus stops instead. Deep in thought about the materials that would best suit the costumes, Jessica paid no attention to the passersby. She accidentally bumped into someone's shoulder and quickly apologized, continuing to walk without looking. "Jessica," a male voice called out. She stopped in her tracks. Turning around, she saw none other than Vincent standing before her. "Jessica, hello," he repeated. "Vincent," Jessica said, stretching her hand out. Surprise, astonishment, and a smile blended on her face. Strangely, she didn't feel the same negative emotions or disapproval she had felt before when looking at him. "You don't seem happy to see me," Vincent said. He looked at her as if there had been no separation between them. Jessica remained silent. "Did you think I wouldn't come, I guess?" he asked again without waiting for her response. "I'm glad to see you, of course," Jessica finally spoke, still not quite believing her eyes. "But you..." Vincent didn't let her finish. He embraced her and kissed her on the cheek. "You don't look so great." "Tired, I suppose," he said as he led Jessica along. "Come on, we need to discuss many things," Vincent said, opening the door of a familiar car for her. Jessica got into the car, reminiscing about everything she had been through. All the questions that had tormented her before had taken hold of her once again. Now, Vincent was in front of her, the source of her suffering. However, he appeared so cheerful, in good spirits, and full of energy. Vincent inserted the keys, and the car started moving. He began telling Jessica about everything that had happened to him, everything that had transpired. He was justifying himself and expressing deep regret for how things had turned out. "Jessica," he addressed her, "I finally came to get you. I told you that I was planning to move to Paris. I've already taken an apartment there for my family. I personally don't like the neighborhood, but Peyton insisted. I don't like it at all, but it's her choice," Vincent explained. Jessica couldn't understand why she was listening to all of this. If she wasn't under his spell, she was certainly captivated. She could only remember his kindness and care for her. Her memories of him were all positive. "Here," Vincent continued when they navigated a tricky turn, "that's why I'd like you to come with me. The only thing is, I need to sort some things out in Paris. After that, I'll get you a ticket, and you can come. What do you think about that?" Jessica was shocked by his sudden appearance and the offer. "You know, Vincent, I need some time to think. The thing is..." But Vincent didn't let her finish again. "Jessica, don't worry. You can trust me," he said. "Let's grab some lunch. I'm starving," he added, parking the car outside a restaurant. Jessica couldn't seem to find a way to cut off his conversation and tell him that she didn't want to continue any further communication with him. Intellectually, Jessica knew that she needed to end this. However, her heart was telling her otherwise. She didn't want to disappoint him, especially after seeing how excited he was to meet her, how openly he spoke with her, sharing his affairs. Jessica didn't pay attention to the fact that Vincent had no interest in how she had been living without him. He was clearly looking for a convenient woman. As usual, the waiter had set a large table for them. Vincent was still in high spirits. Jessica had gotten quite hungry by then. "So, how was it without me?" he asked finally. "Did you miss me?" He answered his own question. "As you can see, I kept my promise and paid for 6 months of rent. How are you managing with your work?" "I'm managing," the girl replied. She had no intention of ruining this joyful atmosphere with her troubled past. "Why aren't you eating? Come on, try it. They cook wonderfully here," Vincent said. Jessica smiled in response. It seemed like everything between them was as it used to be. Nothing extraordinary was happening so far. "I'll just have lunch, that's all," she thought. But she didn't know that she had once again fallen into this man's sticky web. After lunch, Vincent mentioned that he needed to visit a rented apartment and pick up some documents. They would also have to drop by the temporary accountant's office. So they did. After arriving at the apartment, Vincent rushed into the shower to freshen up and change. It was hot outside, and Jessica was feeling sticky. She ran her hand along her back. "You can freshen up too, but you have nothing to wear," Vincent remarked. "I'm sorry, but we'll stop by and buy you something for sure," he added. Jessica also stepped into the shower. The cool streams refreshed her body, washing away the sticky sweat and dust. She stood on the soft white bath mat. Suddenly, Vincent entered the bathroom, causing Jessica to gasp. "Why? Are you shy around me?" he asked, approaching and pinning her against the wall. Jessica quickly covered herself with a towel. "You are amazing. You are damn beautiful," he said in a half-whisper, capturing her lips with his. Passion surged within Jessica. However, after a deep kiss, Vincent pulled back. "We need to get going." "Hurry up," he said before stepping out into the hallway. Vincent and Jessica quickly got dressed and were in the car within 10 minutes, heading towards the accounting company. Before getting out of the car, Vincent kissed Jessica again and closed the door. Jessica ran her fingers through her hair. "What are you doing?" she asked herself. "Stop it." Her phone rang, and it was Aaron. He said that he couldn't meet her tonight because a friend had asked for his help. "All right, I understand," Jessica said and hung up. She felt a bit relieved. Just then, Vincent returned and plopped into the seat. "We'll park the car now, and then we can go somewhere," the man said, a mischievous glint in his eyes. Jessica didn't know what to do. She couldn't control herself. He had truly enchanted her. If it weren't for his family, she might have stayed with him. After all, he seemed like the perfect man for her. "Vincent, I'm sorry, but I can't go," Jessica managed to say. "Why? What happened?" Vincent asked, looking at her face closely. His thin eyebrows, resembling Asian eyes in part, were enchanting. "You have beautiful features," Vincent said, his voice softening. You don't value yourself at all, he added, trailing his finger along her cheek. I'm grateful for everything you've done for me, for your help, for your support. It means a lot, Jessica spoke sincerely, but I've already told you that I'm not ready to be second in your life after your wife, she concluded. Vincent smirked. Is that why you're like this? He chuckled. You've invented it all, he said as if Jessica had been talking nonsense. I'm serious, she insisted. It's better to stop this now than for me to suffer twice or 3 times more later. I don't want that, she said emotionally, trying to convey the seriousness of her reasons. You're making it all too complicated, Vincent said. Don't overthink it. You're still too young, he added, pressing the gas pedal. Jessica felt herself sinking into her seat. Why don't you want to take me seriously? She asked him. Jessica, just trust me, Vincent said. At that moment, he was as serious as he had been in their previous encounters. On the way to the restaurant, they stopped at one of the upscale boutiques. Jessica adamantly refused to get out of the car. I want to end things between us. Let's just call it quits, Jessica said. But Vincent paid no attention to her words. Jessica, listen, my sweet, Vincent began. Let's agree that this will be our last time, and then we'll part ways gracefully, once and for all, he said decisively, and it seemed believable. After some thought, Jessica agreed. The dress she selected in the boutique suited her perfectly. It looked elegantly exquisite and accentuated all her charms. You're enchanting, Vincent said, meeting Jessica as she emerged from the fitting room. With your figure, you can wear anything, he added, running his finger along the neckline. Jessica appreciated the compliments and the gifts Vincent lavishly bestowed upon her. She couldn't disagree with that. Dinner at an expensive restaurant was delicious, as always. Jessica hadn't been to such places in a long time. I forgot to tell you that there's a party at my friend's place tonight, Vincent said, taking a small box from his bag. This is for you, as a keepsake, he said jokingly. Jessica opened the box, revealing a delicate and elegant gold necklace inside. Vincent, are you spoiling me on purpose? Jessica exclaimed, delighted with the gift. After taking the necklace out of the box, she put it around her neck. The necklace looked exquisite, and a small teardrop-shaped pendant matched her new dress. I want my woman to be beautiful and happy, Vincent said. Their hands touched, tracing lines as if dancing. The waiter, who brought the bill, interrupted their idyllic moment. After settling the bill, Vincent left a generous tip. When Jessica and Vincent arrived at the party, everyone was already there. Loud music filled the room. Vincent greeted his friends, chatted with them, and cracked jokes. Jessica engaged in a brief conversation with an unfamiliar girl. Soon after, Jessica noticed Aaron's face among the attendees. Maggie, could you take me to a quieter place? She asked. Maggie readily agreed. Are you here alone, or with a guy? Maggie asked, looking Jessica up and down. With a guy, she replied. The girl entered the spacious kitchen, closing the doors behind her. Me too. It turns out that men like to talk more than women, she remarked, opening the refrigerator. Will you have something to drink? She offered, showing a wine bottle. Yes, Jessica said, settling into a soft chair. Today, I didn't want to come, actually, but my boyfriend convinced me, she said, emptying her glass and pouring more for herself. Jessica was barely surprised. Where are you from? Vincent asked, entering the kitchen. No, please close the door. I don't want to listen to all that noise, Maggie said, shaking her head. Vincent laughed and closed the door behind him. All right, Aaron will pick up my car. I just talked to him, Vincent said. Jessica felt a lump in her throat. So, we'll take a taxi back, he added, approaching Jessica. Wait, did you just meet with Aaron? Jessica asked, hiding her anxiety. Yes, he probably left already, completely unaware. Vincent replied. Is something bothering you? He asked. No, Jessica lied. So, how about we dance? She suggested. Vincent nodded. Well, if it's just for a short while. We'll leave soon, he agreed. Pleasant slow music filled the room. The guests either vacated their seats and headed for the dance floor or partnered up to continue the evening in dance. Vincent put his arms around Jessica's waist, and she placed her hands on his shoulders. Harmony filled the space between them. Jessica felt happy again in his company, for a moment even considering that she would agree to anything to stay with him. She raised her eyes to look at Vincent. He was studying Jessica as well, his gaze moving between her eyes and her mouth. At some point, Jessica glanced slightly to her right, and suddenly a shock ran through her. Aaron was standing there, observing their dance. His eyes were filled with coldness. Jessica felt an overwhelming awkwardness and hurriedly hid behind Vincent's back. After a few seconds, the dance ended. Vincent was ready to go home. Aaron was still in the same spot. Jessica tried to find a reason or excuse to avoid talking to Aaron and leave as quickly as possible. However, Vincent grabbed her hand and led her towards the exit. "Is something wrong?" he asked Aaron. "Is there something wrong with the car?" But Aaron was silent, keeping his gaze fixed on Jessica. He replied that the car was fine. Jessica was ready to disappear into the ground. Vincent noticed the tension on Aaron's face. "Why are you still here, then?" he asked his friend. "I just decided to make sure everything is fine with you guys," Aaron replied, never taking his eyes off Jessica. But the girl composed herself. After all, she hadn't promised anything to Aaron. "Well, then goodbye," Vincent said, extending his hand for a handshake. Aaron responded to the gesture. Jessica and Vincent went outside and got into a taxi. "What's up with Aaron?" he asked, as if thinking out loud. "Maybe he's just tired," she replied, turning her head to the right, looking through the window at Aaron's car parked by the porch. Vincent smirked at Jessica's words. It seemed he was satisfied with the situation, unlike Aaron. They entered the apartment. Inside, Jessica gladly took off her right shoe. Vincent knelt down and removed the other one, then started massaging her foot. Jessica was in pure bliss. Afterward, they walked together into the dimly lit living room. The light from the corridor barely illuminated it. Vincent loosened his tie and unbuttoned the top buttons of his shirt before approaching Jessica, who had stopped in front of a large mirror. He came up from behind and ran his hands along her waist. Lifting her loose locks, he began kissing her neck. Jessica gazed at their reflection. Vincent's strong hands eagerly embraced her body. Jessica could no longer resist his tenderness. 2 days later, Vincent left for Paris again. He called Jessica from there and stayed in touch with her. Jessica surrendered once more, ready to follow him to the ends of the earth. She continued working as a seamstress. Aaron persistently sought meetings with her. However, Jessica realized that she hadn't acted in the best way. After apologizing to Aaron, she tried her best to avoid him, citing her busy work schedule, which wasn't a lie. Work indeed kept her occupied. One day, Aaron deliberately caught Jessica leaving work, holding a large arm full of rolled-up fabrics. He offered her a ride, but she declined. Aaron insisted. "Aaron, I understand how I must look in your eyes now. Doesn't it bother you at all?" she asked him directly. "No, it doesn't. Everyone makes mistakes," Aaron replied, sticking to his point. "Aaron, it's not quite that," Jessica began. "You see, I love Vincent, and I've loved him from the very beginning," she said sincerely, believing in her words. "Girls tend to be idealistic and get impressed by anything," Aaron replied. Jessica raised her eyebrows. "Let's talk," he persisted. "I don't think there's much to discuss." "You can't command the heart," Jessica calmly stated. "Come on, I'll at least give you a ride home," Aaron continued, looking at the pile of fabrics in her hands. Jessica lifted them slightly to make them more comfortable to hold. "All right, then," Aaron pushed. At that moment, Jessica felt dizzy. The ground beneath her seemed to turn cotton soft, and everything around her began to spin. She regained consciousness in Aaron's arms. He had managed to catch her. The rolls of fabric were scattered on the asphalt. "You must be really exhausted," he said, helping Jessica into his car. He also carefully arranged all the fabrics on the back seat. Jessica was still feeling unwell. "Would you like some water?" Aaron offered. Jessica nodded. "Thank you," she said as they arrived at her home. "You look rather unwell." "I can stay with you." Aaron offered his assistance. "Oh, no, thank you. It's past already," Jessica replied. She said her goodbyes and entered her house. Weakness overcame her, and after having dinner, she went to sleep. The next day began as usual. Jessica tailored suits and delivered them for fittings. Vincent called Jessica every evening to check on her. She didn't mention her feeling unwell, thinking it was just a typical blood pressure fluctuation or something of the sort. Aaron also tried calling Jessica, but she didn't answer his calls. A couple of weeks later, Aaron returned to her workplace. He had been there before but never on one of Jessica's working days. This time, the timing aligned perfectly. Spotting Jessica, he opened the door and eagerly approached her. He was delighted to see her again, and Jessica offered a friendly smile. "Maybe we can take a little walk and have dinner," Aaron suggested, genuinely wanting to spend time with her. Jessica didn't object this time. "Aaron, please understand, this might be for the best," she told him as they strolled along the promenade. "A person should be able to control their emotions," Jessica said, as if talking to herself. "Jessica, marry me. I want us to be together. Trust me, you won't find happiness with Vincent," Aaron persisted, trying to convince Jessica to stay with him. Jessica was thoroughly confused. She needed time to figure out her feelings. Aaron decided to wait patiently, not rushing her. After their walk, they entered a cafe. Jessica felt an insatiable hunger, even surprising Aaron, who watched with interest as she devoured the first and second courses. After satisfying her appetite, Jessica leaned against the couch's backrest. Her face relaxed, but her body began to feel hot. Jessica suddenly experienced warmth and then a shortness of breath. She began fanning herself with her hand in an attempt to cool down. "Are you feeling hot?" Aaron asked, observing Jessica. "I'll get some water." He was about to go fetch water when Jessica stopped him. No, thanks. Let's go outside. Otherwise, I might risk oxygen deprivation," she said, getting up. Darkness started to creep in before her eyes once more. Jessica grabbed Aaron's hand. "Oh, I see what's going on," she said, beginning to suspect the cause. Outdoors, Jessica began to feel much better. "Jessica, you're scaring me," Aaron said. "Let me take you to the hospital," he suggested, seeing how Jessica was still taking in deep breaths. "I think that might be unnecessary," she replied, but Aaron insisted. The next day, he took Jessica to the clinic. "Everything looks good. Your baby is developing normally. I recommend taking some vitamins." The doctor handed her a list. Her lips, adorned with bright red lipstick, curved into a single blot on her powder-pale face. She glanced from Jessica to Aaron, and they were both taken aback by the doctor's verdict. "Congratulations to you, the father, and to you," she addressed Jessica. The two of them exchanged glances and then left the doctor's office. "So, it seems I'm going to be a father," Aaron said with eyes full of joy and happiness when they returned home. Unable to turn him away, Jessica reluctantly showed Aaron out. She went to the mirror, looked at her belly, and then at herself. When Vincent called her, she hadn't dared to tell him about her condition. However, when the conversation turned to Jessica moving to Paris, she had no choice but to reveal the news. "Vincent," she began when he called again, "I have some interesting news for you." "Are you ready?" Jessica asked innocently. Vincent grew wary but replied confidently that he was ready. "We're going to have a baby," Jessica announced, fearing his reaction. There was silence on the other end of the line. "What? Are you pregnant?" he asked, with more joy in his voice than anything else. "I found out recently. I went to the doctor, and here we are," Jessica explained. Laughter could be heard. The woman sighed in relief. "My dear Jessica," Vincent said affectionately. She immediately felt relieved. However, the most important question still lingered. Who was the father? Vincent was supposed to visit in a week. Jessica was a bit anxious, getting ready to meet him. She left her house, and there was a car waiting near her gate. But it wasn't Vincent. The driver's door opened, and Jessica saw Aaron. "Where are you going?" he asked with a smile on his face. "Vincent is coming today. I'm going to meet him," Jessica replied. She wanted Aaron to know the truth. "Does Vincent know that you—" "Yes, he knows," Jessica replied confidently. Jealousy was evident on Aaron's face. He tried to keep his composure, but his fingers involuntarily clenched into a fist. "You're not going to him," Aaron said. "Aaron, we've talked about this," Jessica reminded him. "I don't care. You're not going anywhere," he repeated. "I won't argue with you," she replied and walked past his car to the taxi that had just arrived. Aaron rushed after her and grabbed her wrist, attempting to stop her. "Jessica, think about what you're doing," Aaron asked her, walking alongside her to the taxi. "Where are you meeting him?" he inquired. The young woman didn't answer, opened the door, and got into the taxi. The driver looked at her questioningly. "Are we going?" he asked. "We're going," Jessica said in a calm voice. Aaron watched the departing car. Then he got into his own car, picked up his phone, and dialed Vincent's number. He called under the pretense of discussing what to do with the car, but also to find out Vincent's plans for the day. Jessica was greeted by a quiet and cozy place where she could enjoy a good meal. Vincent was very happy to see her. Perhaps he was anxious about her new situation, but he didn't show it. "Hello," he greeted her, hugging her and kissing her on the lips. Jessica felt his care. It was so comforting to have a man who wasn't scared off by unexpected circumstances. "Well, you've certainly surprised me," he said unexpectedly. Vincent hugged Jessica. The couple sat at a table and talked quietly about something. Aaron entered the cafe. He paused at the entrance, scanning for the people he was interested in. Jessica felt his gaze on her. Vincent followed her gaze and noticed Aaron. "Aaron, what are you doing here?" Vincent asked when Aaron approached their table. Aaron kept his eyes fixed on Jessica. "Aaron, what's going on?" Vincent asked him again, not appreciating the intrusive intervention. "Do you need something? Speak up." Vincent awaited his response. "Calm down, Vincent," Aaron said, moving a chair and sitting across from them. Jessica intervened at this point. "Vincent, the thing is, Aaron is trying to dissuade me from living with you, and he's doing everything he can to protect me from it," Jessica blurted out, feeling the heat rising to her face. Vincent smirked. "Seriously?" he asked, looking at Aaron. Aaron hesitated to tell the truth, even though, like Jessica herself, he couldn't know the whole truth. "Vincent, you know that women are very vulnerable and emotional. There's no need to mess with Jessica's head," Aaron said. Vincent, not understanding what was happening, turned his gaze to Jessica. He was looking at Aaron as if trying to convey her plea not to tell Vincent anything. "Jessica, is there something I don't know?" Vincent asked. Jessica took a deep breath, ready to respond, but instead, she seized her last chance for salvation. Rising from the sofa, she clutched her stomach, feigning excruciating pain. The men were alarmed. They forgot about their conversation and focused their attention on Jessica, who continued to writhe in agony. "Aaron, help Jessica to the car," Vincent said, holding the woman by the elbows. Aaron assisted Jessica, settling the pregnant woman into Vincent's car. Jessica rolled her eyes in frustration. She had managed to divert the men from their pressing conversation, but that was all she had achieved. She didn't anticipate Aaron taking the wheel. However, neither of the men dared to raise the issue again. On the way, Jessica started to feel better, and she decided to end her charade of imaginary pain. Aaron dropped them off at the rented apartment. Vincent opened the door and led Jessica inside. As promised, Aaron took Vincent's car to the service. "Why is Aaron so concerned about you?" Vincent asked when they were lying down, resting on the sofa. "How should I know?" Jessica replied, stroking Vincent's head as he lay on her lap. In secret, she decided to have a DNA test to determine the father's identity. Waiting until Vincent fell asleep, she clipped a few of his hairs and wrapped them in a tissue, placing it in her purse. The next day, Vincent informed her that he had bought tickets for both of them. In 2 weeks, they would be heading to Paris. Jessica felt a pulsing in her temples. "Are you happy?" Vincent asked when he told her about the trip. Jessica was silent for a while. Honestly, she still couldn't believe it. "Yes, of course, I'm happy," Jessica said, keeping a happy face. In reality, she didn't know if it was the right thing to do. The day before their departure, Jessica felt very unwell. Vincent started to worry about her condition and the baby's well-being. Following the doctor's recommendation, Jessica was admitted to the hospital for observation. Vincent had to fly alone. Deep down, he thought it might be better this way. In the hospital, Jessica felt a sense of relief about the postponed trip. "Jessica, hi." Aaron walked into the room, holding an enormous bouquet of pink and white peonies. Jessica couldn't help but be charmed and sincerely thanked him. "How are you doing?" he asked with concern. "Getting better," Jessica replied. "I was so worried about you," Aaron said, gently taking Jessica's hand. "I'm really glad to be here with you," he added. His face was filled with an incredible tenderness and love. Jessica returned his expression with a smile. "I'm also glad you came to visit," she replied. "You can say anything, but I feel that this child is mine," Aaron said, kissing her hands. "And even if it's not, I still don't want to lose you," he added. Jessica didn't respond. She knew that human nature was very fickle and uncertain. After all, she was no exception. Jessica recalled the strands of Vincent's hair that she had used for a DNA test. She had done everything discreetly, keeping it a secret from everyone. When she was admitted to the hospital for observation, she never had a chance to retrieve the test results. Time passed. Days turned into weeks, and weeks into months. February had come to an end. By this time, Jessica had transformed into a real mother bear, ready to give birth to her baby. During all this time, Vincent had only visited once. He regularly called but did nothing more. Aaron, on the other hand, had been there the whole time. Even when it was time to give birth, he accompanied Jessica to the delivery room and later brought her home. After giving birth, he took Jessica to his apartment. The woman didn't resist, realizing that taking care of the baby in a well-appointed apartment was far more convenient and pleasant. They named the baby Harold. The more Jessica looked at him, the more she couldn't determine who his real father was. With his dark hair and blue eyes, he resembled Jessica herself. As for the DNA test results she had once ordered, they still hadn't arrived. The doors to the convent opened. Kiernan walked briskly down the corridor with a sense of purpose. In her hands, she held an envelope. Jessica was resting in her room after lunch. She had managed to finish more work than usual yesterday, so she could afford to take a little extra rest today. Someone knocked on the door of her room. Jessica got up from her bed and opened the door. The animated expression on the elder's face intrigued and frightened Jessica at the same time. "What's happened?" she asked, eyeing the envelope. "I don't know. You're the recipient. Read it, and everything will become clear," the elder said, handing over the letter. The corners of her lips lifted as if she knew something more. Jessica extended her hand and took the letter. Once she was alone, she immediately unfolded it. With every line she read, her chest rose higher and her breathing quickened. After reading the letter to the end, she pressed it to her chest and brought her other hand to her mouth. Now, after reading this letter, the final puzzle piece fell into place. She finally remembered how she ended up here. In the letter that Aaron himself had written to her, it was about their son, about how he was doing well and living with his father. Aaron also mentioned that he had received the results of the DNA test in place of Jessica. However, he hadn't told anyone about it on purpose, to prevent Jessica from doing anything reckless. When Jessica disappeared, Aaron made several attempts to find her. However, after he realized that the woman who carried bread in the monastery was Jessica, he was overjoyed. But to avoid shocking the woman who had survived, he was advised not to tell her anything yet. Aaron got in touch with Vincent and explained everything to him. Vincent didn't believe it at first, but after receiving the paternity test results, he accepted the truth of the matter. As for Jessica, who was still in the convent, under the insistence of Beth, one of the senior women in the monastery, Aaron didn't rush to take Jessica home. He also asked Jessica to prepare for their meeting. He planned to come for her in 3 days. Jessica sat on the edge of the bed, and in her memory resurfaced that fateful piece of the past that had caused her the most pain. After Harold was born, Vincent continued to stay in touch with Jessica and even visited Madrid. He genuinely had some feelings for the woman. Something about her had captivated him. Perhaps, despite his external grandiosity and aversion to simplicity, Vincent saw a kindred spirit in Jessica. That's why he had tried to move her to Paris to keep in touch. Or maybe he was genuinely keeping his promise to buy her an apartment. When the child was 1 year and 2 months old, Vincent sent Jessica the documents for the apartment to confirm the reality of the purchase. To say that Jessica was surprised was an understatement. Vincent also sent Jessica a plane ticket. Learning about this, Aaron became greatly alarmed. He didn't want to lose Jessica. However, he still couldn't bring himself to tell Vincent, his longtime friend, that he was in love with Jessica. Not everyone would be able to accept what had happened between their girlfriend and their friend. Contemplating his options, Aaron took a desperate step. Early in the morning before the flight, he took the baby and drove him to a place where no one could find him. He knew that Jessica wouldn't be able to leave without her child, so she would stay with him. Jessica woke up at 7 in the morning. She had slept well and felt great. After washing up, she checked the baby's room, where little John used to sleep. Instead of her son, an empty crib greeted her, sending her into a panic. She rushed into Aaron's room but found only an empty bed. Trembling with fear, she dialed Vincent's number, but he didn't answer. It wasn't uncommon, as Vincent could be busy or with his wife. Jessica called Aaron's number. He answered after the second ring. "Aaron." Jessica said his name, her voice on the verge of tears. "Did you take my son?" she asked, trying to keep herself together. "Jessica, I beg you, please understand me correctly. Don't leave, I beg you," he spoke. "You took Harold?" She repeated her question. "He's fine, and he'll always be fine. But I don't want you to leave. I'm not ready to let you go. You won't be happy with him." "Listen to me," he reiterated. His voice was calm, and Aaron was resolute in his intentions. "Jessica, become my wife. We'll be happy. I promise you. We'll have a good family," Aaron said. "Where have you gone?" she asked, but Aaron hung up. Jessica began to pace around the apartment. She didn't know what to do with herself. A mother's heart couldn't bear the separation from her own child. Dark thoughts crept into her mind. Jessica sat down on a chair, tears streaming down her cheeks. Running possible scenarios through her mind, she hastily put on her jacket, sneakers, and rushed out onto the street. After ordering a taxi, Jessica reached a forest road, and the driver turned left. After letting the driver go, Jessica walked from memory towards the river bank. Finding a boat hidden among the bushes, she untied the rope, pushed the boat into the river, and climbed in. Taking both oars, she started rowing to the right, staying close to the shore. Suddenly, a strong wind blew. The river grew restless, and heavy clouds hung low in the sky. They seemed so low that they might fall at any moment, shrouding everything beneath them. Jessica acted courageously, as if she had forgotten what fear and timidity were. Raindrops began to fall from the sky. Jessica paddled harder, but the waves significantly slowed her down and complicated her work. Wind gusts tugged at her hair and clothing, penetrating her completely. The boat began to rise and fall with the surging waves. Jessica struggled to maintain her balance. In a moment, the rain poured down. Within minutes, it soaked her clothes entirely. However, Jessica seemed to be impervious to the cold and fear. She defied it all, driven by her determination to find her son. The heavy rain curtain prevented her from seeing where she was going. The wind currents turned the boat, and the high waves pushed her off course. Jessica decided to turn back to the shore. She started rowing, or at least that's what it seemed like to her, but the rain and thick darkness made it impossible to see more than 3 meters ahead. Everything around her turned into a solid, gray, wet mess. Jessica desperately paddled toward the shore, but, in reality, she was heading into the middle of the river. The swift current and the turbulent river severely rocked the boat. At first, Jessica accidentally let go of one oar, and then a surging wave snatched the other from her grasp. Jessica clung to the boat's sides, praying to God for salvation. The next moment, she found herself submerged in the deep water. By morning, the wind had calmed, and the river had become peaceful. The river had carried Jessica to the shore dozens of meters downstream. It was here that she regained consciousness. Jessica looked at the letter once again. "I'll come for you 3 days after noon. Aaron." She reread the entire letter and then decided to visit Kiernan. "Kiernan, I've wanted to tell you that my memory has returned," Jessica said as if she were trying to conceal something. "I figured that out," she replied. "Have a seat." She offered Jessica a chair. "Why didn't you ask me or request that I leave your convent?" Jessica asked. "Why would we? If you didn't talk about it, it meant you weren't ready," she replied, raising a cup to her lips. "According to the letter, I'll be going home soon," Jessica said with some regret. "Then it must be for the best, especially since you have such a young son," she kindly said. "How did you know about that?" Jessica asked, surprised. "I know everything," she laughed good-naturedly. "My memory reminded me of all my terrible deeds," Jessica admitted. "God sends us trials so that we don't blame ourselves but learn something, draw conclusions, you understand?" Kiernan asked. "Yeah," Jessica replied. "It's a shame to let such a seamstress as you slip away." The senior nun chuckled. Jessica sighed. "I will definitely come to visit you," Jessica said. Kiernan patted her on the shoulder. The next morning, Jessica approached the gates with some of her belongings. A car was waiting there, and a few seconds later, Aaron stepped out of it. "Jessica, he said in a soft voice. "Is that you, Jessica?" Jessica gazed into his blue eyes, examining his face, his mouth, nose, and chin. Aaron, it seemed that now, Jessica truly understood how deeply he loved her. "Did you read the letter?" he asked, hoping she wasn't angry with him. "Of course, I read it." Jessica licked her lips. At that moment, she had nothing more to say. "And I'm not alone. Just don't faint, all right?" Aaron added cautiously. Opening the rear door, he retrieved her son, or rather, their son, from his child car seat. Tears of joy rolled down Jessica's cheeks. However, Harold didn't immediately realize that the woman before him was his mother. He silently examined her, never breaking into a smile. Jessica felt a bit disappointed but understood that they had been separated for a long time. "Well, shall we go home?" Aaron asked, looking at Jessica. She nodded. The women from the convent had given Jessica some modest dowry, a few sets of bed linens, a set of towels, and freshly baked bread, and had sewn a cute little outfit for the baby. "What a beauty!" Jessica exclaimed. "When did you manage to make this?" "I knew you would reunite with your son," Anne said, kissing Jessica. Then Jessica glanced at Kiernan, who had her usual serene look. She then shifted her gaze to Beth. Her expression was typically stern, but this time, there was something warm in her eyes. Beth would remain a mystery to Jessica. After saying goodbye to all the residents of the convent, Jessica got into the car. The engine purred to life, and the car drove away. Returning home, Jessica experienced mixed emotions. She was delighted to be back with her family, but also regretful of her impulsive actions in the past. As for Vincent, he had left Jessica and ceased tormenting her. He finally realized that to play with people's emotions was unfair. Aaron had some concerns, thinking that perhaps Jessica didn't have real feelings for him. However, with time, he began to see that this was not the case. One day, he decided to try his luck once more and proposed to her. Jessica agreed, embracing Aaron with open arms. 3 weeks later, Jessica and Aaron stood before the registrar, a bright woman with large golden earrings. She spoke eloquent words and addressed questions to the groom and bride in turn. "Well, newlyweds, you may now kiss," the registrar pronounced. Their kiss had never been so sweet. After leaving the registrar's office, Aaron stood their little Harold on his feet. The child gazed at the beautiful Jessica for a while, then nestled against her legs and said, "Mom, you're my mom." Jessica picked up her son, showering his face with kisses. Hearing her son's joyful voice was pure happiness. From that day on, Aaron, Jessica, and their son began to live together. Soon, they acquired their own apartment, a dream Jessica never thought possible. She had only recently begun to grasp what she might have lost by moving to another city and taking on the role of a mistress. "You're so wonderful," Jessica said, approaching Aaron one day and embracing him. "What brought this on?" Aaron asked, watching his emotional wife. "Just because," Jessica replied.